Chapter 831. Fan Yuhai rode on his horse and stood outside the city. Before he left, he had already thought about the safety of the city. Hence, he had left his trusted aide, Zhang Meng, by Sud Khan's side to prevent any accidents from happening. As for Agar Dorji and his son, he had only sent people to keep an eye on them to prevent them from causing trouble. This pair of father and son did not pique Fan Yuhai's interest, but the 15,000 cavalrymen under his command were something he was determined to obtain. He was even prepared to take over this force at any time. From this, it could be seen that this person had a grand plan. Outside the city, there were 5,000 Mongol cavalry on the left and right. A total of 10,000 Mongol cavalry had attacked. By the time they reached the center of the battlefield, they didn't see any reaction from the mercenaries. They did not send out their cavalry like they did at the start. This made the generals who were leading the cavalry feel confused. However, the beating of the drums did not stop, so their army could not stop. As such, they whipped their horses and charged forward. It was only a distance of 3 miles, but the cavalry charged forward for more than 2 miles. Just when they were 1 mile away from the mercenary camp, gunshots suddenly rang out. Pa pa pa. The gunshots did not stop, and the Mongol cavalry at the front fell off their horses like dumplings. 6 battalions, a total of 2,400 musketeers, squatted in front of the mercenary cavalry like a long snake, forming an impenetrable net of fire. Enemies within 500 meters were shot down one by one. The cavalry was very fast, and it should not be easy for the musketeers to hit a fast-moving target. However, there were too many enemies, and it could be described as a dense swarm. With such a formation, even a blind man would have a 90% chance of hitting the enemy. Not to mention, these 6 battalions had been trained for a long time. The gunshots were dense like firecrackers, and the response was that there were Mongol cavalry who fell off their horses at every second. As the numbers accumulated, more and more enemies died on the battlefield. Fan Yuhai, who was standing at the rear, couldn't help but feel heartache when he saw this scene. He knew more about guns than any of the Mongol cavalry generals, and that was why he knew how terrifying they were. Back then, wasn't the mighty Jianghu kingdom defeated by such firearms? At that time, even the elephant soldiers could not gain the slightest advantage, let alone the charging Mongolian cavalry. The sounds of gunfire continued, and more Mongolian cavaliers died, but they were about to close the distance of 1 mile. At this moment, within the mercenary army, the sound of the bugle of charge rang out. Toot, 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 toot. The loud and clear sound stimulated the adrenaline in the human body, causing every soldier to have the urge to jump on their horses and raise their whips to go on a killing spree. Charge! Tiger's Mane, who was riding on his horse and wearing a white cloak, let out a loud roar. Then, he raised his saber and was the first to rush forward. Now, he urgently needed a great victory to prove himself and wash away the shame of his previous defeat. With Tiger's Man's shout, the various divisions and regiments all moved. In an instant, over 10,000 cavalry jumped out and swarmed over, shocking the Mongol cavalry. Retreat, retreat. Seeing that the situation was not good, Fan Yuhai immediately gave the order to retreat. Immediately, the sound of the gong sounded out, and the Mongol cavalry who did not know what to do immediately turned around and ran. Their reaction was not slow, especially since Fan Yuhai's order was very timely, so they should be able to retreat safely. However, Yang Chendong had already given the order to make preparations. When Tiger's Man and the others charged, they raised their sabers as a feint. Seeing that the Mongol cavalry wanted to turn around and leave, they all picked up their sabers and chased after the Mongol cavalry and shot at them. The prepared bows and arrows shot out and landed among the Mongol cavalry. With a series of pai li pa la sounds, over 1,000 Mongol cavalry were shot down from their horses, either dead or injured. This chase lasted for 3 miles. Only when they were in front of the enemy and under the city walls did the signal to retreat sound out. Immediately, the 10,000 mercenary cavalry received the order and retreated in an orderly manner. This caused Fan Yuhai, who was waiting for a chance to counterattack, to be disappointed once more. When the mercenary army retreated, there was no chaos at all. It was as if they had rehearsed this a long time ago. Whoever retreated first would stay behind to cover for them. Even if he sent out the cavalry now, he would not be able to gain any benefits. Furthermore, most of the cavalry were still in the city and had not been sent out. Even if he wanted to move them out, he would need time. This was the disadvantage of having a small city. Outside of the city, there was no way they could fit 60,000 troops. This was probably one of the reasons why Yang Chendong dared to bring his troops over to provoke them. The sky slowly darkened. In the second battle, they had not injured the enemy, but they had lost another 3,000 men. Adding everything together, they had lost close to 5,000 men. Retreat, all of you, back into the city. At night, we need to tighten the defense and prevent the enemy from attacking at night. Fan Yuhai's expression did not change as he said to Lu Duo and Kamuba. After that, he rode into the city and headed straight for Sud Khan's residence. When Fan Yuhai saw Sud Khan, he reported everything that had happened today. He was already prepared to be scolded. However, unexpectedly, Sud Khan did not scold him and only nodded. "And, the losses were not big. Have you figured out the situation of the war god?" Fan Yuhai pondered for a moment before replying in a deep voice, "It's about time. The other party has too few soldiers. If we really fight, the one who loses will definitely be him. Therefore, he should only be trying to intimidate us. As long as we don't move out, the other party won't be able to take advantage of us and will naturally retreat." "Good, then I'll leave everything to General Fan. Against the war god, being able to defend the city without losing is already a great achievement. After all, this person is too famous. Even if you want to defeat him, it won't be done in a day." Suda actually tried to persuade him instead. Fan Yuhai immediately revealed a very moved expression and said, "Yes, this subordinate will remember." Suda's generosity was partly due to his appreciation of Fan Yuhai's ability. More importantly, the cavalry that died today were not his direct subordinates, nor were they the elites of the Mongolian tribes in Mo Bay. People like them might have been herders yesterday, but today, they had become soldiers. There were many people like them in Mo Bay, so the loss of a few would not be a heartache. Fan Yuhai naturally saw this point as well. That was why he sent the cavalry that were not strong to test the enemy. Just from this point alone, it could be seen that he did things appropriately. The Mongol army retreated back into the city, and the mercenaries cheered as they set up camp. They even lit up a huge bonfire. Under the light of the fire, be it the veterans, captives, or new recruits, everyone had a victorious smile on their faces. Today's 2 victories gave them great confidence. They were filled with trust towards the war god. They believed that under the leadership of the war god, victory would belong to them. Outside the central tent, there were many people moving around. 2 guards had switched positions to ensure the safety of the 6th young master. In the tent, Tiger's Mane stood in front of Yang Chendong and flattered him. Or rather, it could be said that he was not flattering, but speaking the truth. "Young master, you're just too amazing. Your formation at the tip of the arrows caused them to not know what to do. Using the musketeers against the cavalry, you used silence to stop them, effectively avoiding all sorts of problems when shooting while moving. If this goes on, before long, we'll be able to take down these Mongolian soldiers and wipe away the shame." Tiger's Mane was still speaking excitedly as if he was saying something great. However, Yang Chendong suddenly raised his head. "Do you really think that with our current formation, we can destroy the 60,000 Mongol soldiers in front of us?" Tiger's Mane was stunned by this sudden question. He stood there not knowing what to do. After being stunned for a long time, he did not know how to reply. Fortunately, Yang Chendong did not intend to make things difficult for him. He quickly answered his own question. The enemy has 60,000 soldiers, and we only have 10,000. Moreover, there are many new soldiers and captives who have not fully adapted to our military rules. Relying on this force to defeat the Mongol army is completely impossible. It was not that it was impossible, but it was completely impossible. Just from this sentence, one could see that Yang Chendong's mind was still very clear. Then, he said, the only reason we were able to obtain victory today was because the old soldiers and musketeers displayed enough advantages. If the two sides really fought, then the loser would definitely be us. This is impossible. Tiger's Mane said in disbelief. Nothing is impossible. Tiger's Mane, as a general, the most important thing is to understand the situation and size up the situation. Doing something despite knowing that it is impossible is definitely not something a general of an army should do. It is merely the bravery of an ignorant person. Yang Chendong's expression did not change as he continued to speak in an extremely calm manner. This time, Tiger's Mane's expression changed again and again. He thought back to the defeat last time. It was because he underestimated the enemy and did not fully understand the enemy's situation before sending out his troops. In the end, he caused a huge defeat, causing the strength of the mercenary army to be greatly reduced. The sixth young master had no choice but to personally go into battle. Seeing the sudden change in Hu Mang's expression, Yang Chendong sighed softly in his heart. He spoke up once again, I have no intention of blaming you. In the previous battle, the army was defeated. Although you, as the main general, have to bear some responsibility, how many of the regiment commanders below you used their brains? They were all blinded by victory and thought that the mercenary army was truly invincible. Did they think that the moment the army appeared, the enemy would flee at the mere sight of it? Humph. They did not think about it. The Mongols have ruled here for so many years. How could they be so easy to deal with? If that was the case, the great Ming dynasty would not have sent out so many times and returned in defeat. Failure is not scary. What is scary is not knowing how you lost. That is a person who cannot be saved. Do you understand? Chapter 832. Hearing Yang Chendong's words, Tiger's Mane quickly replied, Yes, young master. We have already summarized our experience. If we don't understand the situation clearly, we won't easily send out troops again. I can promise you this. Yes. Yang Chendong's expression became a little better. Since they had already lost the previous battle, there was no point in dwelling on this matter. As long as the military commanders had learned their lesson and would not repeat the same mistake, the soldiers who had died in battle would be able to rest in peace. Sometimes, losing a battle wasn't scary. On the road to growth, encountering defeat was also a kind of harvest. It was a prerequisite for becoming stronger. As long as the heart didn't lose after a defeat, they could still have the heart to fight again. Moreover, the more they fought, the braver they became. Okay, you can go first. Take care of your own camp. In the next 2 days, we will only surround and not attack. Facing the enemy's challenge, we may even retreat to make concessions. At that time, the morale of the army cannot be shaken. You can go and discuss with the battalion commanders what to do. Yes, go and call over Zhui Feng of the 1st Cavalry Regiment. Yang Chendong raised the cup of hot tea in front of him and lightly waved his hand. Tiger's Mane was the first person he met. He definitely wouldn't be the last. He was making preparations for the following arrangements. There were some things he needed to explain to the commanders. Tiger's Mane left. Not long after, Zhui Feng entered the main tent. After staying for half an hour, he left with his head held high. One by one, the commanders entered the main tent. Every one of them had a private conversation with the 6th young master for half an hour or more. That night, the main tent was lit with oil lamps. It was only when the sun was about to rise that it was extinguished. When the sun rose, the various armies began to cook. Smoke rose in spirals from the chimneys. The fragrance quickly spread everywhere. The army was a scene of bustling activity. 2 hours later, the two armies that had eaten their fill began a new day of confrontation. In front of the city, Fan Yuhai rode out. This time, the cavalry behind him was even larger. From afar, the number of people had already reached 20,000. Facing a mercenary army, especially one that was personally led by a war god, from Fan Yuhai's point of view, even if the entire army moved out, it wouldn't be excessive. The cavalry formed a formation of 1,000 men, and they quickly got into formation. Following Fan Yuhai's shout, 1,000 men charged out of the camp. The one leading them was Zamubala, the valiant general of the Mongol tribe in the north of the Gobi Desert. After Zamubala appeared, he led this 1,000-man team and charged towards the mercenaries. When they were about a kilometer away, he suddenly stopped. Countless experiences and facts had told them that this distance was relatively safe. Zambala, who had stopped his horse, began to challenge the mercenary general. He looked like he wanted to have a one-on-one battle with the mercenary general. 1 versus 1. This kind of battle strategy was used in the ancient times, had been passed since ancient times. This was especially true for cavalry. They paid particular attention to the tightness of the battle formation and the momentum of the charge. With just one man and one general, the effect that they could exert was already very limited. A battle strategy like 1 versus 1 had not appeared in a long time. But today, it appeared in front of two armies. Many people's faces were filled with confusion. Then, some of the generals' faces were filled with excitement. It seemed like this was the time for them to display their individual strength and gain merit. Yang Qindong, who was riding on the white dragon horse, had a calm expression. It was as if he didn't see the other party's actions. He didn't move. This caused many people to retract their gazes. They were originally waiting for the war god to pick their generals. But when they saw that the war god didn't move, they didn't dare to look. But there were still some brave ones who carefully spoke to their comrades. "What's going on? Is the war god not letting us fight? Quiet, it's forbidden to make noise in the camp." The moment the soldiers below moved, the regiment commander standing at the front of the group immediately stopped them. A few battalion commanders also cooperated and persuaded the soldiers below, suppressing the discussion. The various divisions and regiments were all like this. Yang Qindong saw this from the corner of his eyes and heaved a sigh of relief. The results of last night's discussion were pretty good. At least the regimental commanders understood his intentions. With their suppression, the army probably wouldn't fall into chaos, but their morale would definitely drop. But this was something that couldn't be helped. The difference in numbers was too great. In order to launch the final attack, they couldn't afford to lose any of their forces. Speaking of which, last night, Yang Qindong had already thought of a countermeasure for Fan Yuhai. If the two sides' roles were reversed, he would have at least two paths to take. The first was to use the strength of the army and use the advantage of numbers to launch a fierce attack. For example, he could directly send 30,000 soldiers and then send 10,000 soldiers behind to launch an all-out attack, using the advantage of numbers to suppress the enemy. In the face of tens of thousands of enemy cavalry, even the strength of a flintlock was limited. Once they charged over, the effect of the flintlocks would be limited and it would be difficult to win this battle. Of course, if he decided to do this, he would have to pay a heavy price. From this point of view, the possibility of Fan Yuhai's choice was relatively low. After all, he only had 15,000 men under his command. He could wipe out his own army, but if he really wiped out the cavalry of the Sud Khan, the Khan would definitely not do it. If the first point didn't work, then there was only the second point left. That was to send out a small portion of the army to challenge and slowly nibble away at the strength of the mercenaries. Using small victories to accumulate a big victory, then expanding the results of the battle. The advantage of doing this was that not only would they not lose too much, but they could also continuously reduce the strength of the mercenaries. And when the number of mercenaries was reduced to a certain extent, it would be time to implement the first plan. At that time, if the number of mercenaries was too low, facing tens of thousands of enemy soldiers, they could only run. These were the two methods that Yang Chendong thought of for Fan Yuhai. Looking at it now, the other party had indeed thought the same and sent out a 1,000-man team to challenge them. A 1,000-man team was naturally not scary. Yang Chendong could casually send out a commander or even a battalion commander to lead a 1,000-man team. With the sharpness of the arrows and the sharpness of the cavalry swords, they could win. But this kind of victory was impossible without paying a price. If 100 men died in one battle, then 1,000 men would have to pay 10 times the price. As time passed, the mercenaries would definitely be the first to be unable to bear it. Not to mention, in a 10,000-man team, there were only a few veterans. Once the battle was over, their effective fighting strength would be worn out by the challenges one after another. How would they have any strength left to launch an all-out attack? Thus, the best way to deal with this kind of challenge was to ignore it and act as if he didn't see it. And with the huge range of the firearms, the other party would naturally be helpless. The only drawback was that in the long run, the morale of the soldiers would definitely take a big hit. This was the biggest test for the mercenaries. Seeing through the other party's intentions, Yang Chendong naturally wouldn't let them succeed. Thus, there was the current strategy of not moving to deal with the changes. Zamubala, who was 1,000 meters away, had already prepared himself for a battle. However, when he realized that there was no movement from the other party after half a day, he thought of Fan Yuhai's instructions and immediately started cursing. He cursed and scolded, calling him a coward, a pussy, and so on. In the end, it was all kinds of insults. What was even more impressive was that Fan Yuhai seemed to have been prepared for this. He even found a cavalryman who could speak Mandarin. While cursing in Mongolian, he also spoke Mandarin. When his voice echoed throughout the land, one could imagine how ugly the mercenaries' expressions were. Battalion Commander, I request to fight. Battalion Commander, I also request to fight. Even if I die on the battlefield, I can't let them humiliate us like this. Yes, we request to fight. Under the scolding, some of the more impulsive soldiers couldn't hold it in anymore. Their faces turned red as they shouted with a belly full of anger. All of you, shut up. All the battalion commanders had been called by their regiment commander for a meeting last night. Naturally, they knew what to do. Although they were also very angry in the face of such a situation and even wanted to rush forward with their swords, they couldn't go against military orders. They could only obey. With the suppression of the regiment commander and battalion commander, although many of the soldiers were a little emotional, it didn't cause any chaos. Under the scolding, many of the soldiers had no choice but to shut up. But from their angry faces, they only obeyed the orders and didn't understand it in their hearts. After a round of scolding, Zamubala retreated with some disappointment. In return, an unknown young general appeared with 1,000 men. They still had the appearance of a challenge. After not getting a reply for a long time, a new round of scolding began. Naturally, it attracted a wave of dissatisfaction from the warriors and their requests for battle. Just like that, the cycle repeated again and again. The dissatisfaction of the mercenaries grew stronger and stronger. However, under the suppression of the regiment commander and battalion commander, no one dared to go against military orders. But at this moment, the morale of the soldiers had started to drop, and it continued to drop. The sky was finally turning dark, and the Mongol cavalry also started to retreat. One by one, they retreated back into the city. The mercenaries also started to set up camp. Hot meals were sent to the soldiers, but for some reason, most of them did not have any appetite. It was obvious that everything that happened today had made them very depressed, and they were very stifled by their anger. At night, after the soldiers went into their tents to rest, some of the battalion commanders finally couldn't take it anymore and stood up. They went in front of their regiment commander and asked for instructions on what to do next. There were also some battalion commanders who expressed their worries. Based on their thoughts, could they ask for instructions from the war god to fight a few battles tomorrow? If not, the morale of the soldiers would drop too quickly and it wouldn't be easy to lead the troops. The oil lamp in Yang Chendong's main tent was still lit. Yang Chendong closed his eyes and wore a large cloak as he sat on a chair beside the stove. But even until dawn, he didn't see any regiment commander come forward to request to fight. Chapter 833. When the sky started to brighten, Yang Chendong, who had been resting with his eyes closed, opened his eyes. He then chuckled and muttered to himself, "Not bad, not bad." Tiger's Mane and the other commanders did not come to complain to him. This proved that they could still control the army. Just based on this point, he was not disappointed. But after laughing, Yang Chendong looked outside the tent that was already bright and couldn't help but shake his head. Today is also a difficult day. Just as they had expected, after both sides got into formation again, the Mongolian cavalry's challenge began again. Just like yesterday, there were still groups of 1,000 men walking out. They were shouting and cursing, and all sorts of insults were thrown out. Those insults were as unpleasant as they could be, and once again, it caused the soldiers below to angrily rebuke and request for a fight. In fact, it was even louder than yesterday. Left with no choice, the battalion commanders had to order a few of the shouting soldiers to be captured and brought into the tent. Only then did they suppress the soldiers' anger. However, anyone could tell that this was just a stopgap measure and not the final solution to the problem. On the contrary, if they captured too many of these people, the ones left would probably be a bunch of weaklings. If these soldiers were to be used as the main force to kill the enemy, their might would be weakened by 30%. Below the city walls, Fan Yuhai looked at all of this with great interest. He was in a good mood. In this battle, the mercenaries had too obvious a weakness, and that was that they had too few soldiers. After finding this weakness, he used the tactic of 1,000-men battle, in order to continuously grind the enemy's military strength. Once the enemy's military strength was reduced by half, it would be time for him to attack. He never thought that the mercenaries would be so tolerant. This was indeed out of Fan Yuhai's expectations, but it also made him very happy. One had to know that not everyone dared to insult the mercenaries in front of them. Since he was able to do so, wasn't it already considered as proving his strength? More importantly, under this kind of cursing, the morale of the mercenaries would definitely drop very quickly. If he did not control it well, it was possible for the army to mutiny. Even if they managed to control the situation by force, as time passed, the morale of the army would drop. Could such an army still win the war? Fan Yuhai was happy to wait. He wanted to see how long the mercenaries could last. As long as they showed any signs of weakness, he would definitely launch a fierce attack. At that time, he would become the first general to defeat the war god. What's the situation in the city? While Fan Yuhai was enjoying the cursing of his own soldiers, he seemed to have thought of something and asked Deputy General Lu Duo beside him. "General, the situation in the city is normal." Lu Duo replied. Then, as if he understood Fan Yuhai's worries, he smiled and said, "General, don't worry. Although the defense of Jianghu city is very tight, the mercenaries will not have any chance to steal the city. Yes, I'm not worried about them stealing the city. I'm worried about other things that we don't know about." Fan Yuhai said in a deep voice. Could it be that the mercenaries were here to scare them? Did they want to scare them away and regain their face? Once they couldn't scare them, they could only hold on like this. But this didn't seem like the style of the war god. But if there was another purpose, what could it be? Fan Yuhai couldn't figure it out. The only thing he could do was to complete the task at hand. Send someone to inform Zhang Meng and ask him to pay more attention to the situation in the city. Also, ask him to protect Sadeh Khan. We must not give Agadorji any opportunity. Fan Yuhai couldn't think of what else the mercenaries might do. He could only order Lu Duo. What he didn't know was that there was a saying in ancient times to take the head of a general from an army of 10,000. There was also a term in later generations called Operation Decapitation. Operation Decapitation was the real purpose of Yang Qindong this time. The soldiers outside the city were all serving this military goal and mission. As early as when the Wolf-Fang Special Forces was just established, one of the main military tasks that Yang Qindong gave them was to decapitate. The commander was the commander of an army. Once the news was spread, it would completely destroy the other party's command center and will to resist. The image of "to catch bandits, first catch the leader, hit the snake where it hurts" reflected this idea. The elements of Operation Decapitation were speed, accuracy, and cooperation. Even if the number of enemies this time was several times their own, the effect of ordinary means could be too small. Especially with a famous general like Fan Yuhai, it was even more difficult to win with wisdom. Therefore, Operation Decapitation became Yang Qindong's first choice. Compared to the mercenaries who had guns and even cannons, the existence of the Wolf-Fang Special Forces was still very secret. It could even be said that it was not known to outsiders. It was precisely because others didn't know that once it was used, the effect would be greater and it would be easier to succeed. If the other party was a large military camp, the commander would be in a military tent protected by layers of military camps. It would be too difficult to carry out Operation Decapitation. But now the enemy was resting in the city, and there were many civilians in it, which created enough conditions for Operation Decapitation. In the military tent of the same army, Yang Qindong changed his seat in front of the sand table. His eyes were fixed on the area marked with Wanda City, and the frequency of his breathing became much slower. "Report," the voice of the first guard captain Qiu Vi suddenly came from outside the door. "Sixth young master, Battalion Commander Su Yunsheng wants to see you. Let him in." Hearing this, Yang Qindong leaned back on the chair. He knew that the conditions that should be prepared were sufficient. The next step was to see the performance of Tai Hu, Bai Zhua, and others in the city. Fan Yuhai was very careful. Every night before going to bed, he would walk around the city tower to see the army's night deployment. After making sure that nothing would go wrong, he would leave with satisfaction. But he didn't know that Yang Qindong didn't mean to send the army for a night attack at all. His hope was on the Wolf-Fang Special Forces and the Ghost Sniper team that had already entered the city. These two teams had limited personnel, only a few dozen people. If they wanted to enter the city, they wouldn't arouse suspicion at all. Although the 4 gates of Wandu city were closed since the sudden appearance of the mercenaries, in fact, Tai Hu and others had already entered the city a few days ago in disguise. Now they were making all kinds of preparations in the city. If words had to be used to describe it, it was like Sun Wukong who got into the belly of Princess Iron Fan and was ready to make a big scene. Even during the war, there was no curfew in Wanda City. They were different from the Great Ming Dynasty. They never had such a saying and consciousness. Therefore, even though the sky was completely dark and it was already midnight, one could still see some shops on the streets lit up by oil lamps. There were also some figures walking back and forth on the streets from time to time. The Drunken Pleasure House was the largest and the best business in the city. It was also the largest brothel in the city. In a private room, the two teams of Tai Hu and Bai Zhua, who had been dressed up, were drinking here. At the same time, they were also discussing tonight's action. Beside them, 2 women wearing revealing clothes and heavy makeup were sleeping. No one would have thought that in a place like this, there would be people who spent money but didn't buy sex. Not to mention that they were on a mission, and not to mention that these 2 women were too ugly to look at. Their military discipline didn't allow them to do this kind of thing when they were on a mission. So the 2 of them didn't even look at the 2 women who had fainted after drinking the knockout drug. Instead, they lowered their voices and made plans for the night. The army has been out for 3 days. This is the deadline that the 6th young master set for us. We must act tonight. How are the preparations on your side? Baizhuo was half lying on the table. He looked at Taihu, who was close by, and asked in a low voice. Everything is ready. Skinny Monkey and King Kong are watching that kid. Taihu narrowed his eyes, making it impossible for others to see what he was thinking. Even his murderous aura had been completely concealed. The 6th young master once said that a real assassin wouldn't reveal a trace of murderous aura. If they couldn't do this, then they were unqualified. Now, Taihu had entered this realm. Good, then I'll wait for you to make a move. After Baizhuo said this, he poured a cup of wine on himself. Then, he walked out of the room with a strong smell of alcohol. At this time, the drunken pleasure house was the best time to seek pleasure. Rashly leaving would attract the attention of people with ulterior motives. However, the smell of alcohol was completely different. It was the best cover. After Baizhuo left, Taihu also stood up. Then, he put his right hand to his mouth and whistled. Naturally, people with ulterior motives could hear it. However, for those who were drunk, this sound wouldn't attract the slightest bit of attention. They would only think that a wanton person was doing something rash. After the whistle sounded, in the best private room of the drunken pleasure house, a man who was sleeping with 2 women in each arm suddenly felt a chill on his neck. Then, a piercing chill rose from his heart. Instinctively, he reached out to grab the dagger under his pillow. Hala, if you're a young master, why struggle? You should know that since I've come here, I naturally won't give you any chance. A skinny man who only weighed about 80 kilograms chuckled, revealing a harmless smile. However, if one looked carefully, it wouldn't be difficult to see that there was a hidden killing intent under his laughter. The person lying on the bed was Hala compared to Fan Yuhai, who was fighting war god outside the city every day. He was cooped up here every day, enjoying what he thought was the most beautiful thing in the world. However, he didn't expect that someone would suddenly appear in front of him. How did he get in? Why didn't the guards outside notice? Chapter 834. Questions popped up in his mind one after another, but at this moment, he couldn't think too much because the dagger on his neck had already pierced his skin. The feeling of blood flowing down his skin was like a worm crawling on his skin. Feeling that his life was in danger, Haliruo's face changed. Compared to other people, he was more afraid of death. Especially after enjoying so much in the world, he was even more afraid of death. He was afraid of losing everything. Brother, don't be impulsive. What do you want? Whether it's money or an official position, I can give it to you. Presumably, you already know my identity. I can satisfy you. Seeing Haliruo's cooperation, Skinny Monkey-like couldn't help but nod. Very good, I like to deal with smart people. Tell me, where is the crude oil in the city, and what's the password for tonight? Crude oil? You. Who are you? Haliruo's face changed greatly. Whether the other party wanted money or an official position, he believed that he could satisfy them. But when it came to crude oil, he had to be careful. Because that thing was something that even his father didn't want to provoke. As for the identity of the person who inquired about the crude oil, it seemed like it was about to be revealed. The dagger slid down and suddenly reached the dark fatty's chest. Then, it stabbed lightly. Haliruo immediately felt a bone-piercing pain, causing his face to contort in pain. At this moment, the skinny monkey-like man's voice sounded again. It seems like you still don't understand the situation. Since that's the case, I'll leave a mark on your body. No, I'll tell you everything. Knowing that his life was in the hands of others, Haliruo didn't dare to play any tricks. He hurriedly begged for mercy and told the skinny monkey-like man the location of the crude oil. It's in the warehouse in the west of the city. That used to be the city's granary. Take me to see it. Remember, kid, don't play any tricks. Otherwise, I promise I'll take your life before you can shout. The skinny monkey-like man's voice sounded again. The warehouse in the west of the city was where the crude oil was located. But without seeing it with their own eyes, they couldn't be at ease. Trembling, Haliruo put on his clothes and opened the door. As soon as he stepped out of the door, he saw the 4 guards guarding the door. When they saw the young master walk out, they quickly lowered their heads and saluted. However, when they saw the skinny monkey-like figure, the 4 guards couldn't help but reveal a trace of confusion in their eyes. They had been watching outside the door and didn't see any man enter this room. Where did this person come from? How could they know that one of Skinny Monkey's specialties was the bone shrinkage skill? Although the gap in the window outside the door was not very big, it was enough for him to use his unique skill to enter. What are you looking at? If you keep looking, young master will dig out your eyes. When the skinny monkey-like figure noticed that the 4 guards were looking at him, he glared back fiercely. At the same time, he gently applied some force to the dagger behind Hararuo's waist. Cough, don't look around. She's one of us. Although he could speak freely now, he knew that if he said something he shouldn't say, the first one to fall would be himself. As soon as he said that he was one of them, the 4 guards immediately showed a look of understanding. They lowered their heads slowly with an expression that said, "We understand." Clearly, they had misunderstood and thought that their young master's taste had changed. He no longer liked women, but men. Angered by the 4 guards' gazes, Haliruo really wanted to shout, "Your young master doesn't have any other hobbies. Even if he did, he wouldn't like such a skinny man." Of course, he could only think these words in his heart. Shou-ho accompanied the young master and the 4 guards as they walked towards the entrance of the drunken pleasure house. Along the way, many girls greeted him warmly, but because he had something on his mind, he did not reply to any of them. Haliruo only had one question in his mind. When he left the door, there would be 6 more guards. At that time, would they be able to turn around and attack him? Haliruo couldn't guess if these people would kill him after achieving their goal. So if there was a chance, he would definitely give it a try. And this thought disappeared as soon as he walked out of the door and met up with the 6 guards at a street corner. Not for other reasons, but because of the sudden appearance of 3 strangers. The short blades in their hands danced, and in a few moments, the seemingly tall and strong guards were all killed on the ground. And the other side only had 4 people, including Skinny Monkey. The 10 guards didn't even have time to figure out what had happened, and all of them died from fatal injuries. All of this fell into Haliruo's eyes. He immediately said in horror, You just want to look at the oil, not kill people, right?" "Of course not." The skinny monkey-like man chuckled. "If you're obedient, I won't kill you. I can assure you that I won't kill you. Alright, now that there are no more annoying flies, we can go." The 10 corpses were thrown into an inconspicuous corner in the darkness. Haliruo, with 4 guards following behind him, headed straight for the warehouse in the west of the city. Along the way, the soldiers sent by Fan Yuhai and his father, Agar Dorji, were all taken care of one by one. Perhaps they thought that they were hiding very well, but in front of the well-trained and inhumane Wolf Fong members, their every move was magnified like a magnifying glass. As they made their way to the warehouse in the west of the city, Haliruo was still waiting for something to happen. He knew that his father had secretly arranged for people to follow him. As soon as they appeared, he would seize the opportunity to escape. But unfortunately, the journey was incomparably peaceful. He even saw 2 groups of Mongolian cavalry patrolling the streets. Haliruo, who cherished his life, didn't have the courage to shout out. Since Skinny Monkey had sworn an oath to longevity heaven, he had no choice but to believe him. It had to be said that Wolf Fong had chosen the right person. A person who was extremely afraid of death would definitely not play around with his life. Just like that, the 5 of them successfully arrived at the warehouse. From afar, they could see a group of about 100 Mongolian soldiers guarding the place. When they saw someone approaching from afar, one of them shouted loudly, "Who are you? Leave immediately." Haliruo was clearly startled by this shout and his footsteps came to a halt. At this moment, a dagger was poked at his waist. Skinny Monkey's devilish voice sounded out again. "What are you afraid of? Have you forgotten your identity?" Haliruo, who was originally covered in a layer of cold sweat, finally remembered who he was. From the moment he was threatened until now, he found that his courage was becoming smaller and smaller. After being reminded by Skinny Monkey, his heroic spirit rose and he took large strides forward. At the same time, he shouted, "Who are you? You don't even recognize your family's young master?" As he walked closer and closer to the warehouse, the guard saw that it was Haliruo and his 4 guards. He couldn't help but straighten his body. "So it's young master. But I don't know what you're doing here so late at night." "I'm following my father's orders to get some oil." Haliruo followed Skinny Monkey's instructions and walked towards the warehouse with his hands behind his back. Password. Seeing that they were about to enter the warehouse, a Mongolian soldier followed the rules and blocked Haliruo's path. "You dare to block me?" Haliruo pretended to be very angry and roared. "Have you forgotten that your master, Fan Yuhai, was once my father's subordinate?" Of course, these words were a bit too big. They were just temporarily treating Agadorji as their leader. Of course, no one would mention this matter at this time. Seeing that Haliruo was angry, the guard hurried over. Young master, don't lower yourself to the same level as this servant. He doesn't know your identity, huh? He doesn't know, but you do. Isn't it enough that I'm standing here alone? Can't I go in and take a look?" Haliruo put on a demonic expression as he looked at the guard general. He looked like he would fly into a rage at any moment and even start beating people up. Haliruo's reputation in the army was naturally not good. He didn't have much ability, but he was arrogant and had a bad temper. However, he had a good father. If he really provoked him and beat him up here, he was afraid that he wouldn't be able to say anything even if he was in the right. The guard naturally understood this logic. He wouldn't go against his young master because of a password. He immediately smiled apologetically. "Young master, of course I know you. It's just that if you want oil, you can't go in." Haliruo thought that the guard was being tactful. However, after hearing his reply, it was clear that this wasn't the case. Haliruo's face fell. Young master, don't be angry. I'm not stopping you. I'm just telling you that there's no more oil inside. It's all been moved away." The guard came forward and said softly. "Moved away? Why didn't I know about this?" Haliruo's face was filled with shock. This wasn't an act. He really didn't know. Oh, this was an order from General Fan. Not long after the sky turned dark, the oil was moved away. The guard naturally couldn't say that this was a secret order from Fan Yuhai. If he said that, it would seem that Fan Yuhai didn't trust Agadorji and his son. If that happened, he wouldn't be able to bear the consequences. Chapter 835. Even without the general's explanation, Haliruo understood what he meant. When he thought about how he had to hide such an important matter from his father and himself, he couldn't help but feel angry. Good, this Fan Yuhai is getting more and more arrogant. Humph. Let's see if I don't find trouble with him tomorrow. Fine, I'll tell you where the kerosene was moved, and this matter will have nothing to do with you. He pretended to be very angry as he spoke, his saliva dripping from his mouth. His gaze landed on the defending general. But when he looked over, he saw the general's hesitant expression. He said angrily, "What, are you trying to hide it from me? Or was the kerosene not moved at all? You were lying to me all along." "Ah. I wouldn't dare, I wouldn't dare. Originally, the general really didn't want to say anything. After all, the kerosene was moved in secret, and he didn't want more people to know. But since Haraluo had said so, if he didn't tell him the truth, he would really offend him. Helpless, he took a step forward and carefully set a place. Oh. So it's there. Haraluo nodded in surprise, then looked at the general and said, "Fine, I'll believe you for now. If you're lying, don't blame me for taking care of you." I wouldn't dare, I wouldn't dare. But young master, I'll have to trouble you not to tell anyone that I told you this. Otherwise, I'm afraid General Fan will beat me up. As he spoke, the general cupped his hands and begged for mercy. Don't worry, I won't say that you told me. I'll just say that I found it myself. Alright, I'm leaving. Haraluo turned and left with Shou Ho and the other 4 guards. The general couldn't help but wipe the sweat from his forehead. This little ancestor was finally gone. Haraluo's group of 5 quickly left the warehouse. When there was no one around, Shou Ho immediately asked, "Speak, where was the kerosene moved to?" At this moment, Haraluo no longer looked as imposing as before. Instead, he looked like he was begging for mercy. "I can tell you, but can you promise to spare my life?" "Of course, as long as we see the kerosene, I won't kill you." "I've already sworn." Skinny Monkey chuckled. Haraluo let out a sigh of relief at the thought of an oath. The kerosene has been moved to a ruined temple in the south of the city. I'll take you there now. Fan Yuhai had once used fire to burn down the mercenary army and obtained a great victory. However, he also knew that this thing was a double-edged sword. It could hurt others, but it could also hurt him. Therefore, the location of the kerosene was constantly changing. Apart from the soldiers guarding the kerosene, no one else knew where it had gone. Originally, this was to prevent the mercenaries from setting the place on fire, but unexpectedly, the mercenaries still found the place. Tai Hu was indeed very careful. Although he thought that the warehouse might be where the kerosene was stored, he didn't dare to fully believe it until he saw it with his own eyes. Who would have thought that he was right to be careful? Not long after, Haraluo brought Skinny Monkey and the others to the ruined temple. There was indeed a group of Mongol soldiers guarding the place, but they were all hidden in the shadows. If Haraluo didn't appear here, they wouldn't have come out so easily. However, no matter where it was proven that Haraluo's name was strong enough. Perhaps this also proved that the Mongol army's management was flawed. In any case, no one dared to offend him. They allowed him to enter the temple and take some oil before leaving in satisfaction. Inside the temple, Skinny Monkey saw over 100 barrels of oil placed here. After a certain distance, he revealed his original appearance. "Alright, I'll leave this place to you guys. I'm going to report the situation to Tiger Head. See you later." After saying that, Skinny Monkey quickly left. Haraluo wanted to stop him, but another tall guard, nicknamed King Kong, stepped forward and blocked his way. "Kid, are you ready?" King Kong sneered as he played with a sharp dagger in his hand. Sensing danger, Haraluo's face turned pale. "You? What are you doing? He said he wouldn't kill me just now." "That's right, he won't kill you. Otherwise, he wouldn't have left so quickly." "But I didn't say I wouldn't kill you, did I?" King Kong was still smiling, but the killing intent on his face was getting heavier and heavier. At this moment, his killing intent was revealed. He couldn't wait any longer. This person in front of him had caused trouble for the 6th young master more than once. In Wolf Fang's eyes, such a person deserved to die. You're despicable." Seeing that they were about to hit him while he was down, Haraluo wanted to shout. Even if he died, he wanted to make some noise and attract attention. Unfortunately, his reaction was still a little too slow. The moment he opened his mouth, he felt a sharp pain in his chest. Then, all the strength in his body seemed to have been sucked out at this moment. With a face full of depression and regret, he ended his life just like that. Haraluo was dead. After his death, Skinny Monkey quickly returned to the drunken pleasure house. He found Tai Hu and reported the new situation. He thought that it was a close call. Fortunately, he went to take a look. Otherwise, he was afraid that he would have made a big mistake. I already know what happened. Inform the brothers to stay away from the ruined temple and hide. Also, inform Captain Bai Zhua and the others that we will begin the operation in half an hour. The cold wind whistled. Although it was spring, the early spring in the grasslands was still very cold at night. Yang Chendong, who had just taken a nap, was woken up by the radio operator, Wang Shan. After reading the contents of the telegram, he laughed coldly and said, "Good, Tai Hu and the others have done a great service. How about this, immediately call Tiger's Mane and all the other commanders over for a meeting." In the middle of the night, the mercenary camp started to get busy. One by one, the commanders walked into their tents with faces full of suspicion. When they came out again, their faces were filled with excitement. Not long after, the entire camp started to move. However, this time, no one blew the whistle. The soldiers in their tents were all quietly woken up. The movements of the mercenary camp did not attract the attention of the enemy. This was also due to the tyrannical style of the reconnaissance unit. In order to ensure that they would not be attacked, they would usually place their sentries far away. Slowly, the Mongolian army had gotten used to it. Since they had no intention of attacking the camp, they retreated further and further, losing the ability to observe the movements of the mercenary camp at night. The half-hour was about to pass. The various regiments and various ranks of soldiers walked out. They mounted their horses and held their blades. They were densely packed and waited in the cold wind. The commander of the reconnaissance battalion, Su Yunsheng, appeared again. Following Yang Chendong's shout, 2 100mm regimental mortar-caliber mortars were delivered in front of everyone. In order to deliver the 2 cannons, Su Yunsheng had personally escorted them. They had arrived 3 days later than the army, but it had to be said that the timing was perfect. Get ready. Looking at the 2 black cannons, which gave off a chilling feeling, Yang Chendong lightly nodded his head towards Qiu Vi and Dao Shao. These 2 captains had often followed him to test the cannons. Before he had an official artillery unit, they could be considered as qualified candidates. According to the target coordinates that they had obtained before, the 2 cannons were adjusted to the best position after being verified. Then, 2 shells were loaded into the barrels of the cannons. After that, the 2 captains turned their attention back to Yang Chendong. He took a deep breath. For tonight's counterattack, he had waited for 3 days. Of those 3 days, he had allowed the other party to insult and abuse him. Now, everything was about to end. From the time when Tiger's Mane and the others were burned to ashes to this time, only 11 days had passed. He was about to get his revenge. Fire! Under the gazes of all the soldiers, Yang Chendong's shout rang out. Following that, 2 intense and dazzling flames soared into the sky. They flew straight towards the ruined temple in Wanda City, which was tens of li away. The cannonballs flew across the night sky like shooting stars. This scene was seen by some of the Mongolian cavalry who were guarding the city. However, before they could react, 2 loud explosions rang out in their ears. Then, flames soared into the sky. Following that, explosions rang out one after another. The cannons bombarded the oil, causing a chain reaction. Flames soared into the sky and explosions rang out incessantly. Looking at this scene, Yang Chendong raised his hand and shouted, "Blow the bugle call. Everyone, charge! Charge!" The more than 10,000 mercenary cavalrymen couldn't wait any longer. With loud shouts, they galloped forward on their horses and charged straight ahead. The two remaining mortars adjusted their angles and aimed at the south gate of Wanda City and continued to fire. They wanted to clear a path for the mercenary soldiers. In the city, the loud explosion sounded like an earthquake. Khan Sud immediately put on his coat and rushed out of his room. He stared at the ruined temple in disbelief. His eyes widened as he thought to himself, "It's over, it's over." However, something even more frightening happened. Just as he was standing in front of the door and lamenting, a small flame suddenly flashed and entered his chest. The powerful recoil directly knocked Khan Sud to the ground. This sudden unforeseen event attracted the loud shouts of several of the soldiers around him. The decapitation operation had begun. At this moment, it wasn't just this place. Gunshots rang out from several enemy generals' residences. The phantom members who had been lying in ambush for a long time fully displayed their strengths, firing bullet after bullet into the chests of the targets they had long imprinted in their hearts. Chapter 836. One of the targets was Agar Dorji. However, for some reason, the bullet that should have hit his chest only hit his shoulder instead. Fresh blood gushed out from the wound, causing Agar Dorji to scream in pain. My lord, my lord." The soldiers ran over and surrounded Agar Dorji to prevent anyone from hurting him. At the same time, they looked around vigilantly, searching for the assassin. But how could they know the power of a sniper rifle? A sniper more than 1,000 meters away was already beyond their knowledge. How could they still find him? Not to mention, the city was already in chaos. This was the best cover for them. Stop shouting. I'm not dead. Quick, inform the other generals. Retreat, retreat. Agadorji felt the pain coming from his right arm as he gave orders to his bodyguard beside him. My lord, are we not going to defend the city? One of the soldiers asked an idiotic question. Defend my ass. Don't you see? The fire has already started, the people's minds are in chaos, the city cannot be defended. All right, go inform the other generals, we are retreating in the direction of Jianghu town, quickly. After Agadorji shouted these words, he finally fainted from the pain. Following that, everyone was busy shouting. However, even at this time, there were still some bodyguards who didn't forget to go to the Drunken Joy Pavilion. They wanted to find the young master and let him take charge of the situation. However, the reality only proved that this was just a beautiful idea. Fan Yuhai was also attacked by the beheading operation. Regrettably, this person's residence was a little too remote. Perhaps because he was naturally vigilant, his surroundings were filled with his personal guards who had followed him since the Jiaoji period, making it impossible for Baiswa to approach. In the end, he could only choose to set up an ambush at a distance of 1,600 meters. But to be honest, at such a distance, the effectiveness of a sniper rifle was very low. Captain Baiswa was the one who personally carried out this mission. He knew that this person was the only one in the city who gave the sixth young master the most headaches. If he could kill this person, it would be his greatest achievement. Baiswa held his breath and focused his mind. Even though the cold wind was howling in his ears, his posture did not change at all. He continued to stare at his target, waiting for the best opportunity to attack. Through the infrared scope, he saw Fan Yuhai get on his horse and lead a group of cavalrymen out of the courtyard. They headed straight for the main street, and the distance between them shortened. 1,000 meters, 800 meters, the best distance was only 500 meters. However, the best angle and opportunity to shoot did not appear. Fan Yuhai, who was surrounded by bodyguards, gave off a feeling that they did not know where to start. It seemed that no matter which shot was fired, it would be difficult to hit the target. Even if the shot was fired, it would be difficult to guarantee that the shot would hit the target while moving. Forget it. Baiswa's heart sank again. He adjusted his target again. This time, he decided not to hit the man, but the horse. Relatively speaking, a horse's body was much larger than a human's, especially the pure black horse that Fan Yuhai was riding. Even on the battlefield, it was like a crane among chickens. When the target changed, it was quickly locked, followed by the sound of a gunshot. Bang! The sound of the gunshot was accompanied by the scene of the warhorse falling down and Fan Yuhai flying up. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Bai's was shot again, but unfortunately, because he was too anxious, this shot did not hit the target, but hit a bodyguard. Blood splashed, and the bodyguard fell to the ground and died. In exchange, other people shouted to protect the general. Baizhou quietly took advantage of this chaos. The sniper's rule was that once the shot missed, they must withdraw immediately. Otherwise, it would not be him sniping others, but others would snipe him. General Lu Duo, who was in the team, immediately came to Fan Yuhai, who fell to the ground. He saw that the general's face was covered with mud and snow, and even one of his front teeth was knocked out. Blood flowed from the corner of his mouth. He exclaimed, "General, are you okay?" "I'm fine." He felt pain all over his body, but fortunately, every part of his body was still intact, so he was relieved. However, when he thought about the battle before him, he still said to Lu Duo, "Quick, immediately cover the retreat. Find Khan Sud and follow him out of Yunda city. We can't stay here any longer." At this moment, Fan Yuhai's heart was filled with too much unwillingness. Over the past 2 days, his reputation in the army had increased day by day, and the morale of the army had also increased step by step. He was the first person to face the god of war and not admit defeat. He even shouted at the other party to retreat. Because of this, he had become a hero in the eyes of some people. If he had a few more days, he would have even made up his mind to go all out and fight to the end. Unfortunately, Yang Chendong wasn't a person who didn't fight back. He finally started to fight back, and it was so fierce. The explosion of crude oil caused a big fire and panic in the city. The south gate was blown open, and the defense of the city was no longer foolproof. Now that he was injured, although his life wasn't in danger, he had lost the ability to move freely for a short period of time. Under such a disadvantage, he was afraid that he could only abandon the city. However, he knew that his battle with Yang Chendong wasn't over. This was just the beginning of the grassland. Of course, because of the lack of information, he didn't know that Khan Sud, Agadorji, and some other generals had been shot. If he knew, he would have given the order to retreat even more decisively. Lu Duo had always been by Fan Yuhai's side. Since the time in Jiaoji, he could see that his general was extraordinary. Facts had proven that no matter how many times others had been defeated by the mercenaries, even if their countries had been destroyed and they had lost their lives, General Fan had always protected himself well. Just this point alone was enough to earn Lu Duo's respect. Now that the general had given the order, he would definitely do his best to carry it out. After agreeing, he ordered someone to pass on the order. Then, he found a large wooden plank and placed Fan Yuhai on it, before leaving with his head held high. At the east gate of Wanda City, there were a few gaping holes in the walls. Following these holes, the mercenaries easily entered. What followed was a battle cry that shook the heavens. The 2,000 Mongol soldiers that were in charge of defending this area became the first target. Over 10,000 Mongol soldiers came from different directions like a tornado. Even a man and a blade wasn't something that these 2,000 Mongol soldiers could withstand. Very quickly, this army was swallowed up by the flood of horses. After successfully entering the city, they could see many Mongol soldiers on horseback searching for their troops. When these people saw the mercenaries charging into the city, they immediately scattered and wanted to leave. However, in front of the mercenaries who had a plan in mind, their actions were laughable. When the first regiment had their own mission, they only needed to follow the orders. As for the Mongol soldiers blocking their way, they could just casually kill them. Regiment after regiment of mercenaries entered the city, and the independent division led by Tiger Mang set their sights on Sud Khan, who was constantly running away. When the scouts reported that a large group of Mongol soldiers was retreating towards the north of the city, he immediately made a decision and led a division of cavalry to chase after them. The previous defeat had always been a pain in Tiger Man's heart. Originally, he wanted to perform better, but he never expected that he would be defeated in the end. Although the sixth young master did not punish him for this matter, and did not even say a harsh word, he knew in his heart that the young master must be disappointed in him. When one made a mistake, it wasn't something that could be fixed with just a sentence. What Hu Mang wanted to do was to establish a new merit and prove his worth once again. This time, after hearing the direction that the Mongolian cavalry fled in, he sent a personal guard to inform the sixth young master. Then, he led his men and chased after them. Tiger's man wanted to wipe away his shame, and this time, he was really going all out. He ordered his soldiers to place their excess equipment outside and left a battalion of soldiers to guard it. Following that, he took back the horses of this battalion. He wanted to increase the speed of his troops to the maximum and wanted to catch up to the escaping enemy. Tiger's man left the city. Even though the independent division wasn't fully replenished after the previous battle, Tiger's man didn't hesitate at all with 5,000 soldiers. He knew that the time to beat the drowning dog had arrived. At this moment, there was no time to hesitate. Tiger's man left the city and chased after the enemy at an extremely fast speed. In order to ensure that he could catch up to the enemy, he used all the flares he had. Every time he ran a certain distance, he would fire a shot to light up the path of the army. The Mongol army that left the city first was originally a little flustered. However, after leaving the city, their panic slowly faded. Although the mercenaries had caught them off guard, and even Sud Khan, Fan Yuhai, and a few other generals were injured or killed, they still had their own advantage. That was that their numbers were still many times that of the enemy. Based on this, as long as the mercenaries weren't stupid or crazy, they definitely wouldn't chase after them. When more and more people had such thoughts in their hearts, suddenly, the scouts behind them sent news that they had discovered a large group of mercenaries following them. Many of the generals were stunned. Did these mercenaries not want to live anymore? Weren't they afraid that they would die if they chased after them? General Chen, I'll give you 3,000 cavalrymen. Stay behind and bring up the rear. Remember, it's best if you can take down the enemy. If you can't, delay for a while before leaving. Lu Duo, who had temporarily taken over Fan Yuhai's position, said to one of his subordinates. General Chen was asked to stay behind. Although he had a bitter expression, he knew that he couldn't disobey orders. He could only nod his head and leave with 3,000 cavalrymen. The Mongol army continued to retreat. Lu Duo looked at the dark sky and hoped that the sun would rise. As long as the sun rose, he would be able to clearly see the actions of the mercenaries. He wouldn't give them any chance to launch a sneak attack. If they did well, it wasn't impossible for them to counterattack. Chapter 837. General Chen led the 3,000 cavalrymen back and coincidentally bumped into Tiger's mane. Just as he got into position and raised his saber to kill, a white light suddenly flashed in front of his eyes. The strong light made him unable to open his eyes for a moment. Fortunately, this feeling disappeared quickly. However, before the light disappeared, his eyes couldn't help but twitch because he seemed to see the cavalrymen on the other side raising their spears, and then, there was no then. The 6 battalions of musketeers used the flare to lock onto the approximate location of the enemy. Then, gunshots rang out and the Mongolian cavalrymen who were still in a daze were shot off their horses one after another. When the distance was less than 500 meters, the power of the Type 81 assault rifles had already exceeded the imagination of some people. After the gunshots, there was the sound of war horses galloping on the ground. Tiger's mane led the other cavalrymen and quickly rushed over. Taking advantage of the moment when the enemy was stunned, they raised their sabers and slashed down. As they slashed, the Mongolian cavalrymen fell off their horses one after another. Without knowing the enemy's situation and the fact that they were defeated, the 3,000 Mongolian cavalrymen couldn't even unleash their advantage and were pierced through by the arrow formation. Naturally, the reason why they were able to succeed so smoothly was because they weren't elites to begin with. They were all recruited by Fan Yuhai when he was roaming the grasslands. Their combat strength could only be said to be average. Their numbers were inferior, their quality was inferior, and even their will to fight was much weaker. After just one wave of attack, they took at least 1,000 heads. After just one attack, the 3,000 cavalry were crippled. General Chen was unfortunately killed by a musket. Without a head, the Mongolian cavalrymen scattered like birds and beasts. Those who could run ran away without a trace. Those who couldn't immediately threw down their weapons and surrendered. Leave a battalion to look after the captives. Also, take away their war horses. Everyone get 2 horses and continue the chase. After tasting the sweetness of victory, Tiger's Mane didn't have any intention of stopping. To him, this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Unless the sun was about to rise, unless his independent division was crippled, he wouldn't stop the chase. The Mongolian cavalry was still retreating at a moderate pace. Although they were retreating in a hurry, they still brought a large amount of rations with them when they left. This was also the reason why they could not run fast. Half an hour after General Chen's 3,000 men were sent out, another scout reported that there were still mercenaries chasing after them, and they were less than 8 miles away. For cavalry, a distance of 8 miles could be covered in 2 or 3 charges. Hearing this, Lu Duo wanted to stop the army and have a head-on clash with the mercenaries, but he was worried that he would fall into their trap. He wanted to ask General Fan, who was already unconscious, but he was afraid that this would show his incompetence. In the end, he made his own decision. He called over General Kambala, who was guarding the rear with him, and told him his worries. "General, there are mercenaries following us. If we don't get rid of them, trouble may come at any time." Standing in front of Zambala, Lu Duo spoke while using the torch beside him to observe the changes on his face. Both Lu Duo and Zambala were generals in the alliance. If it had to be said, the former was far less famous than the latter. If not for the fact that Fan Yuhai's warhorse had been killed and he had fallen down in a hurry and passed the command of the army to Lu Duo before he fainted, he would not have been able to ask this question. After hesitating for a moment, Zambala finally nodded his head. "All right, then I will lead the troops to cover the rear. But I want to take 10,000 cavalry with me." "Okay." When it was Lu Duo's turn, he did not hesitate at all, as if he already knew that there would be such an outcome. Seeing Lu Duo agree so quickly, Zambala did not have anything to worry about. The mercenaries only had 10,000 men. With these 10,000 men, he naturally did not have anything to worry about. In the blink of an eye, Zambala had gathered the 10,000 cavalry that originally belonged to him. These were all the elite forces of the Mongol desert. With these, there was nothing to be afraid of. Zambala led the army and left. After Lu Duo sent them off, he turned to the army and said, "Let's go too." Then he rode his horse towards Fan Yuhai. Fan Yuhai, who was under the protection of a group of personal guards, was still lying in a carriage with his eyes closed. Even when the army left the city, there were still people who saw him. Everyone knew that General Fan had been attacked and fell off his horse. Naturally, they thought that he had been shot like Su de Khan. But when Lu Duo rode his horse over, the carriage's curtain was opened from the inside. Lu Duo's figure also entered the carriage. "General, are you all right?" After entering the carriage, Lu Duo asked with concern. "I'm fine. It's just a tooth. There's no problem." Fan Yuhai smiled confidently and then asked, "How are things?" "General, everything has been done according to your orders. You really have great foresight. The mercenaries really did chase over. I first sent General Chen, who was close to the Mongol army, out. As expected, he was not a match. Then, Zambala brought 10,000 troops to cover the retreat. Lu Duo looked at Fan Yuhai with admiration as if he was looking at a god. The god of war was indeed admirable. He could always turn something rotten into something magical. But Lu Duo still thought that their general was not bad. He also had great foresight. If it wasn't for the fact that the general's starting point was too low and he couldn't make many decisions, if they really had the same number of troops, it would be hard to tell who would win. Just like now, the general was just taking advantage of the situation and beating them at their own game. This solved the biggest problem in front of them. One was General Chen who had betrayed them, the other was General Zamobila who was by Suda's side. As long as these two died, not only would their internal problems be solved, they would also have one less enemy. This would be a great help for them to take over the Mongol forces in the Gobi Desert. I'm not worried about you. Oh right, go and inform Zhang Meng. Tell him to protect Suda Khan. At this time, nothing can happen to him. Also, I heard that gunshot wounds are hard to treat. Is that true? Fan Yuhai nodded calmly. He had used the opportunity of being ambushed to do this. It could be said that he had turned a bad thing into a good thing. In reality, he had never thought that he could rely on this alliance to defeat Yang Chendong. Or rather, in front of a strong force, he had never thought of doing anything to the mercenaries. Therefore, he had not tried his best in this battle. Everything was waiting. He believed that the god of war was not a normal person. He must have his own plans for appearing so suddenly. As expected, the facts had proven everything. The city was on fire and the army was in chaos. The east city gate was broken and the enemy had invaded the city. The series of attacks made Fan Yuhai speechless. At the same time, he used the opportunity to achieve his own military goals. This was the nature of a fierce and ruthless person. As long as it was beneficial to him, he would do it. As for emotions and allies, he could throw them all to the back of his mind. Only benefits were what he pursued and needed. Understood. Hearing Fan Yuhai say that gunshot wounds were hard to treat, Lu Duo understood that it would be very difficult for Khan Sade to recover. In the city, Yang Chendong followed the army into the city and saw the two captains, Tai Hu and Bai Zhua, waiting there. You did a good job. I will record your achievements later. Yang Chendong knew that the ancient beheading operation was different from the modern one. The generals in the modern army usually did not have many guards around them. Even if they did, they would not follow them at every step. Unlike the generals in the modern army, they all had bodyguards protecting them. Some even had servants. When they went out, they would not leave their side at all. It was very difficult to take their head in the midst of tens of thousands of soldiers. It was already very good to be able to complete the mission. Excitement flashed across the faces of the two captains, but then Bai Zhua lowered his head and said with some shame, "Sixth young master, I personally went to carry out the operation against Fan Yuhai, but there were too many bodyguards around him. I did not wait for the right opportunity and only hit his horse, causing it to fall to the ground." Fan Yuhai was fine, which was something that Yang Chendong regretted. However, when he thought about how this person had been defeated by him more than once, and how the facts had proven that this person was not terrifying, he said magnanimously, "It's fine, this is his fate. Perhaps this is not a bad thing for us. But next time, we won't be so lucky. And, next time, we definitely won't let him escape." After hearing the encouragement, Bai Zhua said with a very firm attitude. This time, he had also hardened his heart and strived to achieve great merit when he had the chance. At this moment, one of Tiger's Mane's bodyguards came 5 meters in front of Yang Chendong, dismounted and saluted. "Sixth young master, our division commander led the army to pursue the enemy." "Oh." Yang Chendong's eyes flashed. He could understand Tiger's Mane's feelings. After the previous defeat, he wanted to prove himself through a big battle. Now that the enemy had fled in panic, it was indeed a good opportunity to pursue. However, when he thought of Fan Yuhai's various methods, he was still a little worried. He looked at the captain of the first guard squad, Chiu V, and asked, "Have all the regiments reported their positions? Who is the closest to the independent division?" Reporting to the 6th young master, the 1st regiment of Tatar cavalry is killing the enemy outside the city. There is also the ferocious Tiger Regiment and the 1st and 2nd regiments of cavalry in the city. Good, immediately inform Commander Su He, tell him to put down the matter at hand and use the fastest speed to chase after the independent division and provide support. Also, inform the ferocious Tiger Regiment and the 1st regiment of cavalry to follow us to the north. He knew that a thin camel was bigger than a horse. Once the Mongol tribes in the north stabilized their morale, the independent division would not be able to defeat them. Chapter 838. After the order was given, other than the 2nd Cavalry Regiment, the other regiments and battalions followed Yang Chendong to the north of the city. At this moment, 100 miles away from the north of the city, Tiger's Man's independent regiment had clashed with Kambala's 10,000 cavalry, and a huge battle had begun. When two armies met on a narrow path, the courageous would win. After the two armies unexpectedly met on the battlefield, without the slightest bit of nonsense, the two sides fought together. Gunshots, shouts, and roars mixed together. No matter if it was Tiger's Man or Kambala, they were both very prideful people. Since they started fighting, they would not back down easily. Just like how a mountain could not contain two tigers, only one person could stand on the battlefield. First, a series of gunshots rang out, killing hundreds of enemies in the dark night, and the distance between the two sides was pulled closer. Withdrawing 6 battalions of musketeers, Tiger Brilliance led the other 8 battalions of cavalry to personally lead the charge, becoming the tip of an arrow as they charged towards the enemy formation. In the dark night, in order to see the situation around them clearly, both sides had no choice but to light up their torches. From afar, the battlefield looked like a walking fire dragon, majestic and shocking. In terms of military strength, Tiger's Edge was still at a disadvantage. He only had a little more than 3,000 men, but he had to fight with 10,000 cavalrymen. However, that didn't mean that he would lose. With his strong fighting spirit and the constant harassment from the 2,000 musketeers, he wouldn't show any signs of defeat in a short time. Both sides fought together, and from time to time, there would be warriors falling off their horses and dying. It was not the arrow that pierced into the Mongol cavalry and dealt them heavy damage, but it was the arrow that was completely surrounded by the enemy's forces, and in the end, when there was only one person left, all of them would die. The cruelty and mercilessness of the battlefield was vividly displayed at this moment. In less than an hour, both sides had paid a heavy price. Slowly, the advantage of the Mongol cavalry's numbers was revealed. This time, Kambala had brought elite cavalry. In terms of fighting ability and individual strength, they were only slightly weaker than the independent regiment. This could be made up for by the advantage in numbers. Luckily, when the independent regiment was struggling, the 1st Tatar Cavalry Regiment arrived. Regiment Commander Su He shouted, and fresh troops entered the battlefield. The addition of this new force caused the tilted battle platform to become more balanced. Seeing more and more mercenaries, Kambala's mood also changed. His mission was not to destroy the mercenaries behind him, but to block them and buy time for the main force to retreat. Now, it seemed that more than 2 hours had passed, and the sun was about to rise. His mission was complete. Even if he retreated now, no one could blame him. At this moment, he was thinking about retreating. Hu Mang seemed to have seen through Zamobala's thoughts. How could he be willing to give up? It was not easy for him to seize this opportunity. He would definitely not let the other party escape. After giving the order, the entanglement became even more intense. It was as if they were both in the same boat. As the battle continued, the disadvantage of the Mongol cavalry became more and more obvious. They were elites, but this battle was not to attack but to stop the enemy. It was the same as them using their lives in exchange for others to escape. It was impossible for them to not be angry. This kind of battle was not what everyone liked. If they won, they would only complete a military mission. If they lost, they might lose their lives. It was really not a good job. In the beginning, they had the advantage, so it wasn't a big deal. But now, their advantage was getting smaller and smaller, and the sun was about to rise. Once the main force of the mercenaries caught up with them, wouldn't they all be wiped out here? Everyone was selfish. The cavalry who did not want to die started to find a chance to retreat. Facing the attacks of the mercenaries, they did not resist as fiercely as before. The morale of the troops was obviously shaken at this moment. As the main general, Kambala was naturally deeply affected. He could understand the mentality and situation of the soldiers, so he did not blame anyone. He steeled his heart and decided to abandon the 1,000 cavalry to stop the mercenaries while he led the main force to escape. He even had the thought of cutting off his own losses. But before he could think about it, a large number of torches appeared in the west and were quickly moving towards the battlefield. Just based on the direction, it should be the main force of the mercenaries. At this moment, he did not give Kambala any more time to think. He turned around and fled. As he retreated, he shouted for the other cavalry to retreat with him. The mercenaries' reinforcements had just appeared. If they escaped now, they still had a chance. But the moment they were surrounded, they would not be able to find a way out. Zamubala decisively chose to retreat. He didn't even have the time to arrange who would cover his retreat. He wanted to seize every minute to escape. However, he also didn't think about who his opponent was this time. Even if Yang Chendong arrived with his troops, how could he let the fat meat in his hands escape? Long before he appeared, he had already arranged for the leader of the ferocious tiger regiment, Xiao Feng, to circle behind them and set up a formation. The predecessor of the ferocious tiger regiment was the Cold Vanguard regiment. The old soldiers were not only equipped with the 95 style, they were also equipped with 7 steel crossbows. No matter if it was close combat or long range, they could be called the king. With such an elite army placed there, how could you escape just because you wanted to? Kambala did not know this. But very quickly, he realized that the situation was not right. The retreating army continued to fall on the path of the charge. The continuous firing of the muskets was like firecrackers being lit. It continued to ring out. Every time a bullet was fired, there would be a cavalry soldier falling off his horse. Stop the charge. Seeing the continuous casualties, Kambala finally knew that his path of retreat was cut off. Since that was the case, he turned his horse around and decided to fight to the death with the mercenaries. Compared to the unknown path ahead, it was better to turn back and fight the mercenaries head-on. If he was lucky, he might be able to kill his way out. Even if he was unlucky, he might be able to kill 2 more enemies. Kambala turned his head and launched a counterattack. His horse galloped forward. He had the idea of charging forward recklessly and fighting his way out. However, his luck was too bad. He met the 2 generals Tiger's Man and Suhi head-on. 2 against 1, heart against heart. After clashing with 3 blades, Kambala's chest had a wound of about 40 centimeters. Fresh blood quickly flowed out from the wound. The strength in his body was also rapidly draining away. Just like that, a fierce general stepped into a dead end. General Kambala, surrender. Seeing the fatally wounded Kambala, Tiger's Man lowered his cavalry blade and said with a trace of admiration. Although they were enemies, the other party fought bravely. Just this point alone was worthy of his respect. A true Mongol cavalry does not surrender. Go and die. Summoning the last bit of strength in his body, after a roar, Kambala continued to gallop forward. It was as if he wanted to perish together with Tiger's Man. The cavalry blade flashed. A blade to the throat. Tiger's man firmly held onto the cavalry blade that was still dripping with blood. Beside him, Kambala's body trembled. Then, with a plop, he fell off the horse. His eyes were wide open, indicating the unwillingness in his heart when he died. However, if he knew that he was only used by Fan Yuhai and that his head was delivered to the hands of the mercenaries by his allies, he might not be able to close his eyes. Kambala died in battle and the sky began to brighten. The situation on the battlefield was so clear. Under the encirclement of cavalry and muskets, the Mongol cavalry finally put down the curved blades in their hands and knelt down to surrender. This battle was not bad. Seeing that at least 4,000 Mongol cavalry were captured, and they were the elite type, Yang Chendong revealed a gratified expression when he looked at Tiger's man. Before, he was really worried that after the last battle, Tiger's man's fighting spirit would be shaken and he would be afraid. Or if that was the case, he could only keep this person by his side and do some things that he could do. Fortunately, he did not disappoint him and his might did not decrease. After being praised by Yang Chendong, Tiger's man's tiredness immediately disappeared. He opened his mouth and laughed. With these words, everything was worth it. Okay, the independent division will stay and clean up the battlefield. The other regiments will follow me back to Wanda City. There is still a big battle waiting for us. Yang Chendong stretched out his hand and patted Tiger's man's shoulder. He turned around and shouted to the other regimental commanders who had gathered. While he was on his way to help Tiger's man, the 2nd Tatar Cavalry Regiment had sent news that they had surrounded Agadorji and his 10,000 men in Jianghu City, which was not far from Wanda City. This news almost didn't make Yang Chendong turn around. He knew that rice had to be eaten one bite at a time. In the end, he decided to help the independent division solve the problem first before going to Jianghu City to help. Considering that he only had one regiment and it was not a full regiment, he was afraid of losing the situation. He also ordered Lu Zhua's 2nd Cavalry Regiment, who was cleaning up the battlefield in Wanda City, to send a battalion to help. He also arranged for the reconnaissance battalion, Su Yuncheng, to bring reinforcements. Now that the matter here was finally solved, it was time to go to Jianghu City to take a look. To tell the truth, this time's decision was somewhat beyond his expectations. Before the battle, he had only given orders to the regimental commanders to act according to the circumstances. He did not expect that his regiment could actually blast 10,000 enemies into Jianghu City. Speaking of which, this decision was not a coincidence, but a manifestation of his own superior wisdom. After receiving the military order, he took the 2nd Tatar Cavalry Regiment, which only had 2,000 men, into Wanda City. He sent people to inquire about the situation in the city. With the help of the reconnaissance battalion, he learned that Agadorji had left through the west gate. He also learned that this person had been shot in the shoulder and was afraid that he would not be able to move quickly. After that, a bold idea was born in his mind. Chapter 839. After Shoubai gave the order, a rumor spread that Sud Khan and Fan Yuhai had been ambushed and their lives were in danger. Many of the Mongol soldiers had already surrendered to the mercenaries. At the same time, he ordered his soldiers to hold 4 torches each and chase after the Tatar army under the cover of the night. As soon as the rumor spread, the scout at the rear reported it to Agar Dorji, who was fleeing in the carriage. The gunshot wound on his shoulder was no longer bleeding, but the bullet had not been removed. Every time he moved, he would feel excruciating pain. But when he heard that Sud Khan and Fan Yuhai were in trouble, he could not help but laugh to the sky. Ha ha, good, very good, they are in a worse situation than me. There was a saying that when you were down on your luck, all you needed to do was to find someone who was even more unlucky than you. Then, your mental state would immediately be balanced. Agar Dorji, who was laughing, had an ugly expression on his face. He was worried about his situation, especially when he heard from his subordinates that there were mercenaries chasing after him. They didn't know how many of them there were, but they estimated that there were about 7,000 to 8,000 of them based on the number of torches. Agar Dorji's expression became even more bitter as he thought that the main force of the mercenaries was targeting him. At this time, the army was just passing by Jianghu town, which had been occupied by the allied army. Seeing the city in front of him, he did not want to be ambushed by the mercenaries. He ordered his soldiers to enter the city and use the city as a base to defend. When the army entered the city, the 4 gates were quickly closed. Only then did Shoubai feel relieved. If the enemy did not pay attention to him, then with his 2,000 men, he would not be able to stop the army and create enough time for the main force to surround the town. Now that they had entered the city, they were like turtles in a jar, at the mercy of the mercenaries. The sky gradually brightened, and a battalion of the 2nd Regiment of Reinforced Cavalry and the main force of the Reconnaissance Battalion arrived at Jianghu town, cutting off the enemy's escape route. The Tatar cavalry, who had been running for most of the night, were now guarding the city. Although there were not many mercenaries surrounding the city, they did not intend to rush out of the city. In their view, with the protection of the city, it was much better than being surrounded on all sides of the grassland. In the morning, Yang Chendong and the main force of the mercenaries finally arrived at Jianghu town. When he saw that the city was completely surrounded, the 6th young master's face revealed a smile. Good, good, this time Shoubai has done a great service. 6th young master, you flatter me. It's just a little trick. Shoubai did not dare to claim the credit. It would be great if every general had this kind of little. Yang Chendong was still chuckling. He then patted Shoubai's shoulder, full of appreciation. Previously, Shoubai had suddenly been promoted from a fallen general to a regiment commander. During this time, he had not made a single contribution, only following Yang Chendong to the capital. This had caused the dissatisfaction of many people, but no one dared to challenge the authority of the 6th young master. Now, reality had given those people a slap in the face. At this time, Yang Chendong had openly said that if other officers had this kind of ability, they would also be promoted and placed in important positions. There were many brave and fierce generals in the mercenary army, but there were too few people who could hold their own. And those who had this kind of ability were now division commanders. The other regimental commanders were brave in battle, but they lacked the necessary tempering. With this order, the mercenary army surrounded Jianghu so tightly that not even a drop of water could pass through. Any other army would have been waiting for the Tatar army to break out of the encirclement or for them to surrender when they ran out of provisions. It was just a town, and without any preparations, there was no way it could support an army of 15,000 soldiers. But in Yang Chendong's eyes, he wasn't willing to wait any longer. 2 mortars were pulled to the foot of the city wall. Every 8 hours, 2 shells would be fired at the defeated Tatar army. These aimless shells seemed to fall anywhere. As they crashed into Jianghu town, the Tatar soldiers began to scream in pain. They lacked food and clothing, had no future, and could fall at any moment. How long could they last? In the impenetrable encirclement of Jianghu town, which had no water source, after just 4 days, some people began to drink from the snow on the streets and roofs. But the weather was getting warmer, and there was not enough snow, so the situation became even clearer. 7 days later, after being shot, lacking medicine, and having Hilario's corpse hung outside the city, the chaotic King Agadorji died in a fit of rage. Like a dragon without a head, it opened the door and surrendered. Without wasting a single soldier, the 15,000 Tatar cavalrymen surrendered, and the mercenaries returned to the first city with the might of a great victory. This battle lasted for a total of 11 days. The shattering Meng army, injuring Sud, killing Agadorji, and the mercenary army returned to the city. In the beginning of spring, the grass began to sprout, and the willow trees were green. A new wave of construction in the city had begun. Under the planned step-by-step work, Sure City appeared in front of the world with a small change a day and a big change a few days later. Trees that took a lot of effort to move from hundreds of miles away were planted inside and outside the city to resist the wind and sand. The people of Shi City felt like they were in a different world. The changes in the army also began. Among the 20,000 prisoners, warriors were constantly selected to supplement the various divisions. It seemed like the Duke of Loyalty was not satisfied with this change. He immediately sent a telegram to the political department of Xianxia City, and the army building operation officially began. The commander of the First Army on the Sea was decided, and as expected, it was Gao Xiong. A shining golden badge was worn on his body, and the order to promote him to Major General was given. The new army on the land, the choice of commander was out of everyone's expectations, but everything was within reason. The commander, Tiger's Mane, was not the Leng Song that everyone had imagined. The moment the order was given, Leng Song closed the door in the Leng residence in Xianxia City and did not see anyone. He did not even appear in front of the military department. This situation lasted for 3 days, and Jianghu came. The door was opened, and no one dared to stop him. Although Jianghu was from the Yang family's Yang family, he had an extraordinary transcendent status in Crimson Nest City. As for him, he didn't even have a fixed official position, but he could meddle in and ask about anything. Leng Song, who closed the door to visitors, could not give face to anyone in Xianxia City, but he could not avoid Jianghu. The moment the door was opened, Leng Song, who was dressed in civilian clothes, sat in the main hall and welcomed guests. In the main hall, Jianghu's expression was calm, especially when he saw that Leng Song was not wearing the uniform that matched his status. Instead, he was wearing civilian clothes. He shook his head gently. "Commander Leng, are you going to retire from active service?" If it was any other time, the weight of this sentence could be imagined. He would have been in fear and trepidation, but at this moment, he smiled bitterly and said, "I'm afraid I can't wear it even if I want to." "Brother Jianghu, don't you think so?" "Oh? Who said this? Please tell me." "Jianghu will charge him with the crime of spreading rumors and creating trouble. Then, I'll arrest him and interrogate him," Jianghu said unhurriedly. Then, he found a chair and sat down. In the Leng residence, Jianghu rarely came. After all, he was one of the young master's people and had to avoid suspicion. However, he did not come to the residence often. Usually, the two had a good relationship. After all, Jianghu had a great reputation in Xianxia City and had a deep relationship with Leng Feng's First Division. Is there a need for others to say this? Although Leng Song is slow-witted, he can still understand some things. Leng Song still did not raise his head as he replied. His entire body exuded a decadent aura, as if he had aged a lot. "Oh. So it turns out that some people thought they were smart, hee." Jianghu chuckled, then shook his head as if he didn't dare to agree. Hearing Jianghu's mocking words, Leng Song raised his head with a puzzled expression. He thought to himself, "Did I think wrong?" Seeing Leng Song's puzzled expression, Jianghu shook his head. It was the young master's idea to not promote Leng Song's position this time. Leng Song's name was also not mentioned in the 5-man investigation. It was still the young master's idea. In the end, this was just a warning. Leng Song's dissatisfaction with the Army's First Division's performance in the incident with Yang Taizhu and Chen Shuquan was also a warning. He originally thought that some people would be brave after being humiliated, but now it seemed that the pressure was too great. It was so great that some people felt like they could not breathe and wanted to give up. This was especially so when Leng Song saw that there was no hope of promotion and adopted a passive approach. When the news reached Yang Chendong's ears through a telegram, it was not hard to say whether he was disappointed or not. It was often said that the greater a person's mental endurance, the greater their achievements. Just from this sentence alone, it was clear that Leng Song's performance was not good. Yang Chendong even wanted to give up on this person. He had raised Leng Song with one hand, so of course he could suppress him with one hand. However, at this time, the future 6th Madame Yuan Xiaoyu suddenly sent a telegram. She was actually pleading for Leng Song. The telegram did not have many words, the meaning was simple and clear. Everyone would make mistakes, Leng Song was just temporarily blinded by fame and fortune. In reality, his character was not bad. In Yang Tieju's case, it was already proven that he was not involved. In the investigation, there was also no evidence that he had made any mistakes. His mistake was that he had been too proactive in this period of time. His mistake was that he had contacted some people he should not have contacted, wanting to be promoted. Leng Song thought that if more people were willing to speak up for him, he would be able to firmly wear the title of Army Commander and Major General. However, he did not think about who gave him everything in Crimson City. If that person did not nod, what was the point of letting 1,000 people speak up? Chapter 840. Yuan Xiaoyu's telegram changed Yang Chendong's decision in the end. Since this person had been by his side for a long time and had always performed well in the past, he finally forgave him. Thus, Yang Wu's current actions came about. Seeing that Leng Song was in such a state, it was useless to rely on words to advise him. Yang Wu sighed softly and decided to help him to the end. He would properly enlighten him and explain things to him. Of course, he would only do this once and only once. If Leng Song still did not know when to back down after this incident, then he would really have to give up. Division Commander Leng, the young master still has hope for you. After a moment of silence in the hall, Yang Wu finally spoke. Just this sentence alone made Leng Song's eyes light up. He raised his head and stared at Yang Wu. He knew that this person would definitely have something to say. Sure enough, Yang Wu did not stop and continued, Division Commander Leng's performance was indeed not very good a while ago, especially when you found a lot of people to speak for you. Your thoughts may not be wrong, but your actions were not wise. Don't you know that the people you're looking for, everything they have was given to them by young master? Their identities, including yours and mine, can be taken back at any time as long as the young master is willing? I did not mean to pressure him. I just. Leng Song anxiously explained. Alright, Division Commander Leng does not need to explain to me. There is also no need for this because the young master has never cared. Otherwise, would not be saying this to you now. However, there are some things that you can do once but absolutely cannot do a second time. Otherwise, even if Division Commander Yuan pleads for you, I'm afraid it will be useless. This sentence revealed a bit of information. After digesting it, Leng Song's eyes widened. Yuan. Division Commander Yuan pleads for me? The so-called Division Commander Yuan was naturally Yuan Xiaoyu. However, it was precisely because of this that Leng Song's face was filled with disbelief. Be it in public or private, the relationship between the two was very ordinary. Except for the necessary contact at work, there was no personal relationship. There were even many times when Yuan Xiaoyu's attitude towards Leng Song could be described as cold. Leng Song did not expect that the 6th madam would plead for him under such a relationship. However, these words came from Yang Wu's mouth, and they were so true that no one could doubt them. When Yang Wu saw Leng Song's surprised gaze, he sighed again in his heart. The word benefit was indeed very powerful. Usually, Leng Song was calm and orderly when he did things, as if he had the demeanor of a great general. However, when it came to his official career, he was unable to remain calm. Yang Wu didn't want to explain anything. Commander Leng, think about it carefully. What do you have to complain about? Do you know who Hu Tu is? That's the person who's been with the young master the longest. Isn't it legitimate for him to become a commander before you? Zai, did you not hear the order of the political department? Hu Tu is the commander of the new army, and Gao Xiong is the commander of the 1st Marine Army. Leng Song was puzzled at first, but it didn't take long before his expression began to change. They were both commanders, and since there was the first sea army, then the ground army should also be the first land army, but why was it the first army of the ground army? This didn't seem to make sense. The surprise on his face became more and more intense. Yang Wu had already stood up. Commander Leng, you can choose for yourself where to go. By the way, you don't have to thank the sixth madam. As long as you work hard, that will be the greatest gratitude. Yes, this is what the sixth madam said herself. After saying this, Yang Wu did not wait for Leng Song to speak again. He had already stood up and left, leaving behind a graceful and elegant background. Leng Song did not send him off. Instead, he sat on the chair and pondered for a long time. No one knew what the result would be except for himself. However, early the next morning, Leng Song reported to the military headquarters in his military uniform. Everything was back on track again. If there was any change, it would be that he worked harder and was more self-disciplined than before. In Crimson City, Yang Qindong reported Leng Song's recent changes through a telegram. After reading it, he sent the telegram back to Beta Persei. It's not hopeless. Young master, you must not be angry for others. Beta Persei, who knew about this matter, took the initiative to lead the conversation in another direction after comforting him. Young master, who too is getting more and more depressed. The people below are very afraid of him. Yes, Tiger's mane has indeed changed a lot. However, this is not a bad thing. When a person's position is high, he understands that it's lonely at the top. Naturally, he can't be like before. Yang Qindong nodded. Ever since Tiger's mane was promoted to the commander of the new army, he had indeed changed a lot. In short, he smiled less, spoke less, and looked more depressed. Of course, it could also be said that he had become more mature. In less than half a year, he had been promoted from the leader of a regiment to the commander of an army. It could be said that he had been promoted on the front lines. During this time, he had been proud, lost and won battles, until now, he had slowly become more mature. It could be said that all of this was forced. The culprit was Yang Qindong himself. The incident between Yang Taizhu and Chen Shuquan was a wake-up call for him. If it was not for Yu Mian's accidental appearance, the problem would not have been exposed. He could not even imagine the extent of the destruction. Now that he looked back at the cause and effect of the incident, these two people were guilty, but what about the others in Crimson City? Including himself, did he not have any responsibility at all? At the same time that he gave others power, he did not teach them how to use this power well, nor did he have enough supervision measures. It was fine if there was no problem with this kind of power, but once there was a problem, it would be a big problem that might involve himself. After the previous experience, Yang Qindong would undoubtedly be more careful when using people. This time, he did not promote Leng Song to the position of commander, but instead promoted Tiger's mane by 1 rank. Of course, through this matter, Yang Qindong was also telling the officials in Crimson City that there were some things that only he could decide. What should be given to you, will be given to you. If he didn't want to, no matter how hard you tried, or how many people you secretly gathered, it would be useless. At the very least, before Yang Xie was completely strong, this rule would not be changed. Yang Qindong thought in his heart. Speaking of Tiger's mane, he had followed him since he was young, and was the one who would not go against his will the least. This kind of person, with experience and ability, why couldn't he be promoted to commander first? It was just that with Yang Qindong's actions, the one who suffered was Tiger's mane. He felt an enormous pressure. Especially for him, who had just suffered a huge defeat, the pressure was even greater. At the same time that he carried the heavy responsibility, the pressure came with it. All the changes in Tiger's mane were within Yang Qindong's expectations. But at the same time, this kind of change was delightful, because it proved his growth, proved that Tiger's mane was moving from an intermediate officer to a senior officer. As long as he could get through this, it would be much smoother for him when he did things in the future. Let's go and take a look at the new army. Yang Chendong stood up. Since he had chosen to put the heavy responsibility on Tiger's Mane, he naturally wouldn't just move his mouth. When it was time to put in effort, he would put in effort. The new army's barracks were still the same as the old barracks 10 miles outside the city. The only difference was that they had heavier responsibilities. Since it was called an army, there would naturally be divisions under it. The new army had 3 divisions, 3 regiments, and 1 battalion. The 3 divisions were the Independent Division, the Tatar Division, and the Recruit Division, led by Xin Honghai, Su He, and Lu Zhua. Tiger's Mane was the commander, and Shibi was the deputy commander. The 3 regiments were the Heavy Cavalry Regiment Commander Zhui Feng, the Light Cavalry Regiment Commander Ma Xiongxan, the Direct Cavalry Regiment Commander Deng Yu, and the Reconnaissance Battalion Commander Ding Shan. Among them, the divisions had 15 battalions plus 1 direct cavalry regiment, totaling 6,100 people. The regiments had 5 battalions, totaling 2,000 people. The reconnaissance battalion had 5 companies, totaling 500 people. The 3 divisions, 3 regiments, and 1 battalion had a total of 24,800 people. On the surface, other than wind-chasing wolf, everyone had been promoted, especially Shibi, who had soared to the sky in one step. He had been promoted from the regimental commander to the deputy commander. That was a big step. But in fact, wind-chasing wolf was leading a heavy cavalry regiment. Although there were only 2,000 people, which was not as good as before, they were the elites of the elites. They were equipped with the most advanced armor and had several times more combat power than their actual number. To put it this way, if they didn't use firearms and only charged at the other party on the grassland, even a division wouldn't be able to do anything to them. On the contrary, there was a high chance that they would be defeated. It was precisely because he had the strongest warhorse, the best armor, and the most elite warriors that wind-chasing wolf was still very happy even though he didn't get promoted this time. This was the cavalry team he had asked for before. It could be said that he had asked for benevolence and got benevolence. The establishment of the new army had basically digested all the fruits of victory from the previous battle in Wanda City. Now, other than the new army, only the logistics regiment led by Beta Persei and the fierce tiger regiment led by Xiao Feng were left in the first city. After handing over the matter of improving the military quality of the army and patrolling the surrounding areas to Tiger's Mane, Yang Chendong focused his energy on the construction of the city. There was no doubt that the first city would bear a very important position in the future and would even become an important symbol of the mercenary army. The planning and construction of the city were the most important problems. There were many things that even Yu Mian himself couldn't do. It was only the 6th young master who did it personally. Just as Yang Chendong's attention shifted from the war to the construction of the first city, the Ming army in Tulu City, which was 800 miles away, finally began to move. Chapter 841. Spring had arrived. The ice and snow had melted, revealing the green grassland. The grassland was full of life. At the same time, it also represented the beginning of the war. Without the shackles of snow, the grazing season was about to arrive. Resources became the most important thing in everyone's eyes. How to have a better performance and change in the new year became a problem that everyone had to consider. As the commander of the Wanquan Metropolitan Department, Shi Wanshan's days in the Xian Mansion had been very comfortable recently. Unlike Sun Hong, who faced the Walla's leader, Yes Hen, and had a lot of pressure, the Xian Mansion, which bordered the mercenary forces, had good politics and people. The hearts of the soldiers and the people were very stable. Not only that, but the memorial sent to the capital during the new year also indicated that the imperial court had allocated 500,000 taels of silver, allowing them to build 50,000 new soldiers. With money, it was easy to do things. Shi Wanshan's ambition grew. He only had 20,000 soldiers now. If he could have 50,000 more, his strength would increase by more than one level. Since the imperial court had agreed, he immediately took action. First, he recruited soldiers in the Xian mansion. Soon, 30,000 new soldiers were in place. However, he was still not satisfied. In his opinion, the best source of soldiers was the Mongols. Not only were their bodies stronger than the Han people, their equestrian skills were better, and the most important advantage was that there was no need to worry about using these people. Even if they died on the battlefield, the compensation given would be very low. Most people could even not give it at all. He had sent people to inquire and found that many Mongol soldiers had been recruited in the beginning city. Among them, there were Walla soldiers, Tatar soldiers, Mongol soldiers, and Nuzan soldiers. Moreover, the scouts he sent out to inquire reported that the number of soldiers in the beginning city was unimaginable. Countless people cried and shouted that they wanted to join the mercenary army, but they had no way to do so. This news greatly boosted Shi Huanshan's spirit. He saw an example and decided to follow suit and use the same method of recruitment. The master of the beginning city was just a loyal duke appointed by Baiming. Then, if he recruited soldiers in the name of Baiming, wouldn't he be more popular? Thus, at the beginning of spring, there was an additional recruitment office under the city of Tulu, responsible for welcoming the warriors and men of the grasslands. The idea was beautiful, but the reality was often cruel. The recruitment office had been set up for nearly a month, but the number of Mongolians who had actually signed up for the army was few and far between. All in all, there were no more than 50 people, and most of them were weak men. It was impossible for Shi Huanshan to see the recruitment office filled to the brim with people fighting to enlist. Shi Huanshan was a smart person. He quickly found the reason. Only then did he realize that the reason why the beginning city could easily recruit soldiers was because of the reputation of the war god of loyalty. The mercenaries had relied on their fists to forcefully conquer a piece of the world and become known to the world. After figuring this out, he naturally wouldn't be convinced. He quickly got his two deputies, Ancient River and Ning Wenfeng, to discuss the matter of sending troops to Mount Saihan. As a part of the Tatars, Mount Saihan was placed here by the great Khan Tuachuo Buhua to block the path of the great Ming dynasty. However, this huge rock gradually lost its effect after the sudden appearance of the beginning city and the capture of Tulu city. Shi Huanshan didn't know why the Duke of Loyalty didn't take action to remove this nail. However, even if the Duke of Loyalty didn't do it, it didn't mean that he would. Especially now that Tulu city had fallen into the hands of Baiming, the threat of this place was already close at hand. By sending troops to Mount Saihan, they could make a name for themselves and let the warriors of the grasslands know that there was not only the beginning city, but also Baiming's army. In addition, by occupying this place, it was equivalent to having one more front station for Baiming to send troops to intervene in the grasslands in the future. Do we need to report this matter to the beginning city? Ning Wenfeng, who was the commander and was also Shi Huanshan's think tank military advisor, asked. No need. With our strength, we can take down Mount Saihan by ourselves. Shi Huanshan shook his head. In his opinion, perhaps this action wouldn't make the Duke of Loyalty happy. Once he was notified, what if he didn't agree? What should he do then? Seeing that Shi Huanshan had made up his mind, the commander, Ancient River, who was sitting at the side, stood up and said, "All right, since that's the case, I'll lead the troops to fight." 3 days later, 15,000 Baiming soldiers set off from Tulu city toward Mount Saihan, which was 400 miles away. Among them, 5,000 were new recruits. On the city wall, as the guarding eunuch, Deng Chong, watched as Ancient River, who was dressed in armor, led the troops away, he spoke in a hoarse voice, "Commander Shi, I can fill in the memorials for the expedition later, but we must win this battle. Otherwise, I'm afraid that there will be people in the imperial court who will cause trouble for us." Don't worry, eunuch Deng. With General Ancient River leading the troops, there will only be 8,000 enemies on Mount Saihan. There won't be any mistakes. Shi Huanshan looked confident. From all the information he had gathered, this battle wasn't going to be difficult. However, after 5 days, a letter requesting reinforcements was sent back to Commander Shi in Toulouse City. The letter was personally written by General Ancient River. When he arrived at the foot of the mountain, he prepared to attack the city. However, on the third day, when the army launched their attack, they were blocked at the Black Stone Slope. Relying on the advantageous terrain, the Tatar army continuously counterattacked. After charging again and again, 4,000 soldiers died in battle, but they still didn't achieve any results. Not only that, but the 5,000 new recruits were also heard by the army. No matter what orders were given, they weren't willing to charge together with the old soldiers. Seeing that there were only 6,000 men left, Ancient River had no choice but to ask for reinforcements. In the past, all the information said that the Mongol army was useless. When faced with the attacks of the mercenaries, they were often quickly defeated and showed signs of defeat. This made Shi Huanshan think that the Mongol cavalry had also fallen and that their combat strength was not as good as before. However, now that they had actually fought, he knew that it wasn't that the Mongol army had fallen back, but that the mercenaries were too strong. However, since things had come to this, there was no turning back. At this moment, there was no possibility of stopping and retreating. If he really did that, the morale of the army would definitely be shaken, and the recruitment of new soldiers would naturally be unable to continue. Send the troops. This time, I will personally take action. I will lead 5,000 soldiers. Shi Huanshan decisively made a decision. He ordered Ning Wenfeng and eunuch Deng Chang to stay behind in Toulouse City. He personally led 5,000 old soldiers to Mount Saihan. In the beginning city, Yang Chendong had already received the news the moment the army in Toulouse City began to mobilize. Shi Huanshan, who thought that he was smart, closed the 4 gates and didn't allow anyone to leave the city. However, he didn't know that there was something called a telegram. People didn't need to leave the city to send the news to very far places. After receiving the news, Yang Chendong quickly saw through Shi Huanshan's motive. To the south was the territory of Datong Prefecture. There was an old rival of Baiming, Yes Hen. If they begged him not to harass them, they would be very lucky. Then, they would definitely not find trouble with him. The beginning city was very powerful, and it wasn't something that Shi Huanshan could easily touch. After thinking about it, it seemed that there was only Mount Saihan left. Speaking of Mount Saihan, they had also fought with the mercenaries before. They had launched a sneak attack, but they didn't gain any advantage. Yang Chendong originally wanted to get rid of them as soon as possible. However, after the scout reported the terrain there, he stopped this plan. Now was the time to develop the beginning city. It was just a poor mountain. It didn't matter whether they occupied it or not. Even if they occupied it, they still had to send people to guard it. Without that place, it meant that there was no buffer between him and Baiming. Yang Chendong, who had always looked at the big picture, let them go. He didn't expect Shi Huanshan to have designs on them. Well, since he wanted to hit a rock, he might as well do it. When the time came, both sides would suffer. Wouldn't that be more beneficial to him? After receiving the news, Yang Chendong didn't take this matter seriously. In fact, he had already thought about the outcome. On this day, he was attending the opening ceremony of the newly built Yang Family Academy in the beginning city. After a few months of hard work, an academy with a height of 4 stories and an area of more than 100 acres was built. Yang Chendong was the president, and Wang Si was the first vice president. They were in charge of the main matters of the academy. The academy opened up the main subjects such as mathematics, language, physics, science, medicine, and other subjects. There were also other subjects such as sports, music, art, and even foreign language classes. Although they were only teaching some Mongolian, Russian, Japanese, and Korean, for now. However, it wouldn't be long before some Western languages would be developed. At that time, there would be a group of foreign language talents here. This would play a great role in future dealings with countries around the world, and even in occupying them. Because of Yang Qindong's participation, the ceremony became very lively. The 500 students of the academy for the first time were all present. And this was only the first batch. In the future, there would be more people who would enter to learn. After learning, they would be used by Yang Xie. Just after the ceremony was completed, and under the accompaniment of Wang Si, the vice president, he was walking around the academy. The commander of the reconnaissance battalion, Su Yunsheng, appeared and gestured to Beta Persei from afar. Soon after, an urgent report was sent to Yang Qindong. Glancing at the contents of the report, Yang Qindong's eyes paused for a moment. Then he said to Wang Si, who was accompanying him, "Dean Wang, please take care of the matters here. This young master still has something to do, so I'll go first. Tiger Army Commander, come with me." After hurriedly leaving the academy, Yang Qindong returned to the war room in the Yang residence. Tiger Mane quickly came over. The report that had just been sent was also sent to him. After reading the contents, Tiger Mane's face flashed with surprise. After thinking for a moment, he looked at Yang Qindong and said, "Young master, leave this matter to the new army." "Okay, what do you think?" Yang Qindong nodded lightly. The war naturally had to be left to the new army. Unless the situation was serious, he would only bring the Tiger Army. Chapter 842, Tatar Cavalry Spring Hunt. Chapter 842. At this moment, Shi Wanshan had already arrived at the foot of Mount Saihan with 5,000 reinforcements. Not only that, he had already launched 2 attacks. Under the ferocious attacks of the reinforcements, they had already taken over half of the magnetite slope. The dawn of victory was right in front of them. Report. A scout on a fast horse suddenly appeared in front of the Baiming army's tent. Then, the cavalryman, who was sweating profusely, jumped off his horse and knelt on the ground. "Commander, a large number of Tatar cavalrymen suddenly appeared 50 miles behind us. They are heading straight for us." "Behind us?" Shi Wanshan's face turned cold when he heard the report. His eyes were filled with disbelief. Ancient River, who was standing at the side, was also shocked. "What's going on? Are you sure it's the Tatar cavalrymen? Where did they come from? How many of them are there?" "We don't know where they came from, but there should be around 40,000 of them." The scout raised his head and then lowered it again, reporting what he knew. "Retreat, continue scouting." When he heard that there were 40,000 enemy cavalrymen, Shi Wanshan could no longer remain calm. After the scout retreated, he glanced sideways at Gu He, who was at the side, with a strong intention to ask. "Let's retreat. Let's retreat to Tulu's city first. Maybe they aren't coming for us." At this moment, Ancient River didn't have any better suggestions. He could only say this with a fluke mentality. "Okay, prepare to retreat immediately. We don't have much time left." It was only 50 miles away. The cavalrymen would arrive in the blink of an eye. It didn't matter if these people were coming for them or not. For safety's sake, it was better to avoid conflict. The Baiming army, who was still attacking fiercely, suddenly stopped attacking the mountain. Then, they began to prepare to retreat. In order to speed things up, they even decided to abandon some of the less important supplies. Within an hour, 2,000 men of the vanguard were sent out. On Mount Saihan, the Baiming army suddenly stopped their fierce attacks, causing the Tatar generals Mazam and Bela to be puzzled. They were afraid that the Baiming army had a plan, so they didn't dare to act rashly. It wasn't until a gerfalcon suddenly flew over the mountain and was captured by a trainer that they learned what had happened at the foot of the mountain. Ha ha. Mazam laughed heartily when he read the report and passed it to Bora. "Take a look, it's General Hubo, He's leading 40,000 cavalrymen towards Mount Saihan. I'm sure the Baiming army is rushing back to Tulu after hearing the news. After reading the report, Bai La's face was also filled with excitement. General, this means that our chance has come. Does the Baiming army want to escape? Humph. After fighting us for so long, how can they just leave like that? Why don't we keep them busy and buy time for General Hubo to arrive? Then we can pincer them and wipe them out. Alright. However, we still have to be careful of the mercenaries in the origin city. How about this, we'll leave 2,000 men behind and take 4,000 down the mountain. Mazam suggested. Bora nodded in agreement and led the 4,000 cavalrymen down the mountain, leaving 2,000 soldiers behind. After fighting with the Baiming army for several days, they had lost 2,000 men. The remaining 2,000 were their final strength. Shi Wanshan didn't know that he had been targeted. He also didn't know that the Tatar army's original target was them. The 40,000 cavalrymen led by Hubo, were one of the great Khan Tuachuo Buhua's subordinates. They took advantage of the warmth of spring and the blooming of flowers to appear in the grasslands. They also had a unique name, the Spring Hunt. When spring arrived, the cavalrymen would go out to show off their strength and show off their strength. They would also show off their strength and show off what territory belonged to them. These places were sacred and could not be invaded. Otherwise, they would have to be prepared to be attacked by the cavalrymen. Unfortunately, the territory that Hubo had chosen to patrol this year was near Saihan Mountain. The appearance of the origin city and the change of Talu's city had made the Tatar army feel threatened. This time, it was time for them to take back what originally belonged to them. Previously, it was mostly Walla and Baiming fighting. Previously, the Great Ming Dynasty had attacked the Mongol tribes, and Walla had not had any major conflicts with the Great Ming Dynasty. However, Yang Chendong's appearance had broken this situation. They needed to retaliate to show off their position and sovereignty. It was under such circumstances that Hubo led his 40,000 cavalrymen into the grasslands. Along the way, the scouts at the front had sent news that when the Baiming army was attacking Saihan Mountain, Hubo had led his army over. They wanted to start with the Baiming army that dared to cross the line. As the army headed down Mount Saihan, in the middle of the troops, Hubo received news that the North Ming army was making a move and wanted to retreat. A vicious look flashed across his face. You want to retreat? It's too late. Where's General Gar? I'll give you 5,000 cavalrymen. Set off first and stop the Baiming army from retreating to Talu city. The main army will follow soon. Understood. A Mongolian general dressed in armor cupped his fists in acknowledgement, then galloped out on his horse. Not long after, he gathered 5,000 cavalrymen and sped down Mount Saihan. Hubo did not even look at the cavalrymen. With 5,000 cavalrymen paving the way, he was confident that the Baiming army would not be able to escape. At this moment, while hurrying, he said to Mu Ren beside him, General Mu, continue to tell me about the war god. Mu Ren originally belonged to the Tatar faction. Previously, when the Mongol tribe wanted to surround the city, he saw that the situation was not good and immediately escaped. He met up with General Chiga of Guangwu town and left the region together. There were mercenaries in front and the Mongol army in the north. Under such circumstances, they were weak and could only give up on defending this place. They wanted to go to the south to find Tua to work for the Great Khan. However, they did not expect to meet Hubo, who had come for the spring hunt. Both sides gathered together and their army reached 50,000. Since Hubo had asked, Mu Ren naturally had to answer. Yes, General. Speaking of this war god, he is indeed very famous. In this region, everyone who hears his name trembles in fear. After he changed Arakumaki to the first city, he defeated Agar Dorji's 50,000 soldiers and the 20,000 soldiers of the Mongol tribe in the north of the desert. Not to mention the changes in Hubo's heart after hearing Mu Ren's words, just the sudden appearance of 40,000 Mongol cavalrymen in Talos city, and according to the scouts, there were 10,000 soldiers following behind them. When Ning Wenfeng heard this, he immediately felt the severity of the situation. The Wan Quan Metropolitan Division had 20,000 old soldiers. Previously, General Ancient River had taken 10,000 with him. Later, General Shi Wanshan took another 5,000. Now, he only had 5,000 soldiers left, of which 2,000 were in charge of training the new soldiers in the Xian manner. He only had 3,000 old soldiers. With 3,000 Mongol cavalrymen, 40,000 cavalrymen, and 10,000 infantry, it was impossible. The best thing to do now was to defend the city, but whether or not they could do it was another matter. However, this commander Qian Shi unexpectedly made an unexpected decision. That was, he wanted to go out of the city to rescue and welcome back Commander Shi Wanshan. Perhaps in other people's eyes, once something happened to the commander and commander comrade, Qian Shi would be able to smoothly take over the position. However, in the eyes of the smart Ning Wenfeng, this was not the case. If it was peacetime, he might use his brain. However, with the Mongol army at the border, he would not use his brain. If he wanted to stabilize the situation, the Wan Quan Metropolitan Division and the Xian Manor could not do without Shi Wanshan. After making the decision to go out of the city, Ning Wenfeng only left behind 1,000 old soldiers to defend the city. At the same time, he sent someone to inform Deng Chong to send another 1,000 old soldiers and 10,000 new soldiers to defend Talos city. Then, he opened the city gates and left. The situation was very critical. Shi Wanshan, who had left behind a lot of supplies, wanted to immediately retreat to Talos city. At that time, he would still have a chance to defend the city. He moved quickly, but the Mongol army was not slow either. Soon, he received news that the 2,000 cavalrymen in the vanguard had been defeated and were retreating. The scouts said that the Mongol army's General Gaur had defeated our vanguard with 5,000 cavalrymen and is on his way here. There's even worse news. Behind us, General Mazam of Mount Saihan is also chasing us with 4,000 cavalrymen. What should we do? He asked Gu Wanshan anxiously. Clearly, the current situation was far worse than they had imagined. Let's go. He said anxiously. Kill. Carve out a path of blood. Let's return to Talos city before the enemy completely encircles us. Perhaps at this time, Wen Feng has already brought people over to us. Shi Wanshan replied after a short moment of silence. General Ning? Ancient River's eyes were filled with doubt. There's no doubt about it. Wenfeng sees the big picture. He knows the importance of the two of us at this time. If something happens to us, he won't be able to defend Talos city alone. He might even lose Xian city. At that time, even if the Mongol army doesn't take his life, the emperor will. Shi Wanshan said firmly. It had to be said that his years in the bandit den had given him a very accurate grasp of people's hearts. Seeing Shi Wanshan's confidence, Ancient River could only choose to believe him. Alright, since that's the case, what should we do next? You're tuning in to the Unparalleled SwordWill YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.